Harold walked through the busy town streets with a triumphant smile, exchanging cheerful farewells with his neighbors. Having finally secured the house of his dreams just the day before, he felt as though all his hard work had at last paid off. Yet that short-lived joy shattered in an instant when he arrived to find his newly acquired home engulfed in a raging inferno, collapsing to his knees in utter disbelief as fire consumed his entire future. He stood frozen in panic as heavy plumes of dark smoke billowed into the sky above the town, leaving him breathless and trembling amid the indifferent crowd. Wandering aimlessly through the stone pathways shortly after, he felt a crushing numbness settle into his chest, unable to comprehend how such a cruel tragedy could happen to him. He replayed the dreadful moment in his mind, remembering how he had returned from work yesterday only to see the blaze already roaring out of control, sparking dark suspicions of arson. His expression hardened into a hollow stare, bitterly wishing that whatever culprit caused the fire had chosen anywhere else to strike. As he dragged his feet past a nearby shop, the excited chatter of townsfolk suddenly cut through his silent despair. He watched an adventurer boast about finding a valuable magic sword inside the labyrinth, but the sight only deepened his gloom as he acknowledged his own lack of magic, swordsmanship, or extraordinary strength. Looking up at the pale sky with a tightly clenched fist, he let out a tired sigh, desperately grasping that he needed a vast fortune if he was ever to recover from this devastating loss. He wondered how much savings he had left, stepping up to the counter where the teller informed him that his current balance stood at exactly 150,000 rubes. Looking at the official record, he noted that the modest sum was all he had to his name, though he prided himself on having always been an extraordinarily diligent worker. Beyond his main job, he had tirelessly taken on all sorts of side work in his spare time, laboring at the forge, taking on manual work, and foraging for wild vegetables and herbs in the mountains to sell as cooking ingredients. Through sheer determination, he had accumulated over 20 million rubes, but virtually all of it was swallowed up by the construction of his house. Accepting his current predicament, he asked to withdraw the entire remaining amount. Walking through the busy streets with his total savings in hand, he reasoned that since the sum was far too small to rebuild a home, he might as well spend it on something else. Impulsive ideas crossed his mind, such as treating himself to expensive dining or trying his luck at gambling, though he quickly recognized that adopting such an unhealthy mindset was a mistake. While passing a prominent building, a notice for a slave auction caught his eye, prompting a dapper salesman with a wide handlebar mustache to approach and enthusiastically welcome him inside. Surprised, the young man objected that he hardly appeared wealthy and that slaves usually commanded prices of at least 2 million. But the salesman explained that starting bids began as low as 10,000 rubes, opening the door for a bargain if competition was low. The merchant assured him there was no obligation to purchase, encouraging him to step inside merely as a spectator to enjoy the excitement of the event. Curiosity winning out, he allowed himself to be led through the doors, stepping into a spacious, grand hall filled with seated onlookers eagerly awaiting the commencement of the auction. He took his place in the very last open seat, quickly realizing why the merchant had been so eager to drag him inside. A full house always drove up excitement among the bidders. On stage, the flamboyant auctioneer formally welcomed the crowd to the Cirque du Slave, promising a selection tailored to every guest's taste. As the showman explained the rules of the auction, stating that the highest bidder to raise their... Before the crowd stood a striking forest elf in skimpy attire, provoking immediate gasps and excited murmurs throughout the hall. The young swordsman stared in total disbelief, having never laid eyes on a real elf before. Taking advantage of the audience's astonishment, the auctioneer began singing her praises, extolling not only her breathtaking beauty, but also her mastery of archery, magic, and fluency in the Elvish language. He then set the opening bid at an exorbitant 20 million rubes, a sum that left the youth completely floored as he processed just how far out of his depth he truly was. Within seconds, a fierce bidding war broke out among wealthy patrons in the audience, with prices rapidly escalating from tens to hundreds of millions until reaching a staggering 633 million rubes. The auctioneer brought his gavel down, declaring the forest elf sold to a nobleman clad in heavy armor for the astronomical winning bid as the crowd erupted into cheers. The event continued at a grueling pace, with item after item, including rare catgirls and demonic beast folk, fetching fortunes ranging from 15 to 60 million rubes. Watching millions upon millions move between hands in mere seconds, he clutched his forehead in utter disorientation, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over him. Just as the auctioneer announced the final display of the day, the curtain parted once more to reveal a tie on stage, leaving the young man frozen in shock as he recognized the dark elf. He watched in silence as whispers echoed through the crowd, everyone stunned to see a dark elf presented on stage. The buyers exchanged anxious glances and hesitant whispers, terrified that merely associating with or purchasing a dark elf could bring severe danger upon them. Sensing the sudden, cold wall of silence falling over the hall, the auctioneer blinked in confusion, caught off guard by the room's complete lack of excitement. Watching the crowd's cold reaction, the young adventurer reflected on how vastly different this atmosphere was compared to the bidding war for the forest elf. Recognizing that dark elves were widely rumored to bring disaster to all who crossed their paths. Deeply ingrained in their culture were children's fables and classroom lessons warning that dark elves brought misfortune, instilling a lifelong prejudice in the general populace. He considered how dark elves were far rarer than ordinary elves, leading him to realize that most people harbored fear simply because they truly knew nothing about them. Distrust continued to swell among the buyers as dark rumors circulated through the ranks, with men recalling tales of ruined families and mysterious murders linked to the cursed race. Desperate to salvage the auction, the showman began frantically shouting out her credentials, highlighting her youth, magical proficiency, dungeon experience, and ability to handle both domestic tasks and combat. Yet the crowd remained repulsed. Scrambling to turn the tide, the auctioneer insisted that beyond their continent, dark elves were actually revered in other lands as maidens who brought good fortune rather than ruin. Observing the desperate pitch, he deduced that the organizers, likely hailing from a foreign region, had saved her for the grand finale, assuming her rarity would spark a frenzy, failing to anticipate the deep-seated prejudice of the northeastern continent. He watched as the desperate auctioneer set a drastically reduced opening bid of 150,000 rubes, fully aware that the house was taking a heavy financial loss on the dark elf. Seeing the low price, he realized the auctioneer was simply trying to protect his professional pride rather than withdraw her from the stage entirely. Because of the deep prejudice in the room, absolute silence met the offer, leaving the presenter in complete shock as no hands went up. Suddenly, a single hand rose high into the air to accept the bid of 150,000 rubes, stunning both the auctioneer and the surrounding audience. Standing bold and resolute among the seated crowd, the young adventurer was the one who had made the bid. Murmurs of shock immediately erupted across the hall as people branded him foolish, yet he calmly noted that the sum matched his remaining coins to the letter. Beside the podium, the captive dark elf gazed in surprise toward her unexpected savior. Unswayed by common superstitions and reasoning that he had nothing left to lose, he stood by his choice while the flustered auctioneer frantically begged the silent hall for any counteroffers before the chance slipped away. Despite the merchant's desperate pleas, a heavy silence continued to hover over the audience. With no other takers, the auctioneer slammed his hammer down and declared the dark elf officially sold, prompting a quiet look of mutual recognition between the buyer and his new companion. Reaching into his coin pouch, he carefully counted out the exact sum of 150,000 rubes to settle the payment. He sat across from the auctioneer, who could barely contain his delight over the completed transaction, bragging about how dark elves command vast fortunes on the western continent. Reassuring his buyer that honor bound their agreement, the merchant prepared to transfer ownership. Before finalizing the transfer, the merchant presented a magic collar of subordination, explaining that it required a drop of the master's blood to bind. Once activated, the device would sprout lethal spikes if an unauthorized person attempted to remove it or harm its master. Taking the prepared artifact, the young adventurer approached the dark elf, gently letting her know that putting on this collar would officially mark him as her master. As he carefully fastened the dark band around her neck, he offered her a polite, warm greeting, leaving her caught off guard by such unexpected courtesy from a master. Realizing he had not yet learned her name, he prompted her gently, and she timidly introduced herself as a tie. Complimenting her name with a bright smile, he formally introduced himself as Harold Smith, causing her to stare in amazement at his friendly nature. Noticing her intense gaze, he wondered if he had inadvertently made her uncomfortable and immediately offered an apology, which she hastily dismissed. Looking closely at his soft expression, she felt a sudden surge of relief, quietly noting to herself how truly kind her new master seemed to be. Reflecting on that pivotal encounter, she pondered the unexpected chain of events that had brought them together. For his part, he looked back on his past trials, remembering how he had been forced to start anew after losing his home to a devastating fire. He reflected on how he had successfully acquired a dark elf slave, holding her hand gently as they stepped forward together toward the bright horizon. As they made their way through the busy town square, a light elf passerby cast a cold, sharp glare in her direction, sensing an unspoken hostility between their kind. Turning her head away with a disdainful puff of air, she deliberately avoided eye contact with the passing light elves, clutching her hood even tighter around her face. Softening her tone, she offered a quiet apology to her companion, explaining that dark elves and light elves simply did not get along with one another. He absorbed her explanation thoughtfully, realizing there was deep-seated racial tension at play, before turning his mind toward their pressing need to figure out their next move. Laying out their grim situation, he explained that because he had spent all his remaining funds to purchase her freedom, staying at an inn was impossible, nor could they return to his home after it had burned down. Reassuring her with a quick smile, he shared his backup plan. An unused cabin sat at the foot of the nearby mountain where they could safely shelter for the night, an idea she readily accepted. Looking down at her worn garments and bare feet as she asked if something was wrong, he resolved internally that he needed to buy her proper clothing as soon as possible so as not to burden her. He admitted his current lack of funds, promising to figure something out soon, and urged her to speak up if she needed anything. She hesitated before asking if he truly meant it, realizing how far he had already gone by giving up his own house for her. Connecting back to her request, she explained that while immediate purchase was not necessary, proper weapons and armor would be essential, suggesting they head into the maze together to earn money. Her sudden proposal left him utterly bewildered, questioning the wisdom of entering such a dangerous place. To justify her plan, she drew a quick diagram in the dirt, explaining her extensive background with mazes and pointing out that dark elves struggled to find normal employment in town. She outlined a plan to locate high-tier treasure rooms, demonstrating her tactical knowledge to convince him. Demonstrating her formidable capability, she unleashed a burst of powerful magic into the surrounding woods with effortless precision. The explosive force shattered the tree canopy, leaving him wide-eyed and speechless at the raw power she commanded. Though embarrassed by her sudden display, she reaffirmed her determination to earn their keep in the maze without relying on excuses. He countered with serious concern, reminding her of the extreme lethality of maze exploration and stressing that survival must always take priority. Offering him a gentle, reassuring smile, she promised to stay cautious so they both survived, adding softly that she would protect him as well. Her warm declaration caused his cheeks to flush with embarrassment, completely catching him off guard. As they resumed walking, he realized this was the very first genuine smile he had ever seen on her face. Yet, anxiety quickly washed over him as her words registered, leaving him panicking over whether he would be dragged directly into dangerous battles alongside her. Soon after, the pair arrived at the secluded wooden cabin nestled deep within the mountain forest, which proved to be in remarkably good condition. He explained that he had routinely repaired the shelter during past herb-gathering trips, making it a perfect haven where she could begin preparing a simple meal. Once settled inside for the night, he noticed her tense demeanor and gently reassured her that she could sleep peacefully without fear of any untoward behavior. Touched by his respect and consideration, she looked away shyly, whispering her heartfelt gratitude as her heart beat rapidly in her chest. Watching her motionless form from across the room later that evening, he wondered if she was truly asleep or merely feigning slumber out of lingering anxiety from her time in servitude. Recognizing the trauma she had endured, he quietly resolved to give her space and guard her through the night. A heavy, rhythmic metallic clanking echoed through the forest as a column of fully armored soldiers marched along the dirt trail. Watching the armed battalion from afar, the young man recognized them as Imperial troops heading eastward, a troubling sight given that no war had ever been declared between the Empire and the Kingdom of Tawakal. Outside the quiet wooden cottage, uncertainty hung thick in the air, leaving them to wonder if a major continental conflict was brewing just beyond their peaceful refuge. Turning to his companion, he proposed leaving the region entirely for another continent. Though she admitted the idea sounded intimidating, she reassured him about funds and pondered where they might travel next. She suggested venturing to the Great Astral Gorge in the southwest corner of the southern continent, a distant goal he readily accepted, contemplating how he could earn their passage by braving the local labyrinth with his spear skills. Looking up at him, the dark elf asked if he intended to probe into her reasons for choosing that destination, well aware of the unspoken questions lingering between them. Stepping closer and taking a seat beside her on the wooden porch, the young man gently reminded her of her bound status as his slave, to which she softly acquiesced. Reaching out to gently caress her cheek, he assured her that everything was fine, inwardly resolving never to let her leave his side regardless of her past or motives. As her pointed ears twitched at his tender touch, a soft blush spread across her face while he silently reinforced his pledge to stay together forever. Her heart skipped a beat as his lips pressed gently against hers, a quiet declaration of the deep bond they shared. As he pulled back slightly, he earnestly reassured her that she was truly important to him, encouraging her to speak up whenever she needed someone to rely on. She stood frozen in wide-eyed astonishment, processing the sudden warmth of his unexpected affection. Her entire face flushed bright crimson as the weight of his words sank in. If she was truly important to him, it meant she was far more than just a slave. Overwhelmed by the revelation, she buried her flustered face in her hands while he stumbled awkwardly over his own words. Gently touching her fingertips to her lips, she stared at him in stunned silence, her mind racing with the trembling realization that this had been her very first kiss. Meanwhile, Harold later stood outside his former workplace, feeling an awkward knot in his stomach after losing his job during the previous night's chaos. He needed to earn enough funds to prepare for their journey to the labyrinth, resolving to ask his employer for a temporary return despite fearing a harsh reprimand. Stepping inside with quiet hesitation, his arrival caught the shopkeeper entirely off guard, causing the burly craftsman to stop dead in his tracks. The master stared at the young man with wide, trembling eyes, frozen in disbelief as if seeing a ghost. Overcome with emotion, the heavy-set man seized him by the shoulders, revealing that he had rushed to Harold's house after his disappearance, only to find the entire building reduced to ash. He sat quietly across from his master in the workshop, digesting the news of his home's destruction. When his master questioned his intention to travel to the southern continent and reminded him of the vast fortune needed to enter the labyrinth, the young man firmly insisted that he had no choice but to go. Noticing his unyielding determination, the craftsman accepted that his former apprentice could not share every detail and stood up to fetch something. With a heavy thud, the older man slammed a large bundle of coins onto the counter, startling his young apprentice before explaining that he had saved this money as a severance gift for when the boy struck out on his own. Overwhelmed by the gesture, the boy expressed his deep gratitude, but the blacksmith gruffly brushed it off, calling the funds deserved retirement pay for 15 years of faithful service. Stepping outside into the street, he turned back to bow deeply toward the shop, offering heartfelt thanks for everything his mentor had done for him. Later that evening, he returned to their dwelling to find his companion waiting with a massive roasted bird she had prepared for their meal. Seeing her surprise, he revealed the purse of money granted by his master, promising that they would purchase proper adventuring gear the next day before presenting her with a secret gift. She gently touched the wide-brimmed straw hat placed on her head, which neatly concealed her pointed ears, and after a moment of flustered hesitation, she softly assured him that she loved it and would treasure it forever. The following morning, the two ventured into an armory filled with diverse weapons, shields, and firearms, carefully considering which armaments would suit their upcoming quest. He looked on in complete astonishment as his companion bypassed all the conventional swords and shields in the shop. Without a moment's hesitation, she casually hefted an advanced rifle equipped with a high-powered scope, declaring with calm confidence that this was the weapon she wanted. Inside the weapons shop, Aide excitedly raised a heavy sniper rifle, peering down its scope before declaring her desire for it to Harold. The shopkeeper promptly informed them that the weapon carried a hefty price tag of 50,000 rupees. Seeing her hesitate at the cost, he gently inquired if she would prefer an even higher grade option instead. She shook her head, explaining that the price was indeed the primary factor guiding her choice. Her gaze drifted toward a nearby display of enchanted weaponry as she confessed her dream of owning a precision rifle. She pointed out that while high-tier magic bows could rival or surpass standard firearms in power, their cost was far beyond their reach. Looking at the exorbitant tag of 6.8 million rupees on the bow, he instantly understood her practical logic. She went on to explain that even an affordable firearm provided reliable firepower and piercing capability right out of the box. She continued detailing the trade-offs, noting that while firearms required costly ammunition, made significant noise, and were harder to aim, those drawbacks could be mitigated. Ammunition could be conserved through careful shooting, silencers could reduce the sound, and her own skill would handle the targeting. Listening to her passionate breakdown, he smiled fondly as he realized just how expressive and talkative she became whenever weapons were involved. Her enthusiasm made the decision remarkably easy. Without hesitation, he agreed to purchase the sniper rifle along with suppressor attachments, customized leather gear, and 20 boxes of ammunition. Her eyes sparkled with sheer joy as she deeply thanked him, promising to make every single shot count in his defense. Equipped with her brand-new firearm, complete gear harness, and elegant dark outfit, she stood confidently alongside her companion, ready to take on whatever dangers lay ahead. She urged him to equip himself better, insisting that as her master he deserved proper gear. But he calmly argued that investing in her superior combat skills was the far more practical choice for their survival. Acknowledging his modest equipment, he admitted that his gear was indeed poor, resolving to upgrade it only when his wallet allowed. Looking down at the short spear in his hands, he could tell at a glance that it was cheaply crafted and flimsy. Yet, the low quality of his simple weapon did not bother him in the slightest. He doubted he would even get much use out of it anyway, knowing that his innate physical strength would instantly shatter the weapon if he exerted even half his power. Left somewhat speechless by his rationale, she listened as the discussion shifted to labyrinths, dangerous grounds where monster outbreaks directly threatened the surrounding lands. To prevent these dungeons from overflowing with beasts, authorities allowed a wide range of adventurers to explore them, granting them ownership of any harvested monster materials to keep the peace. Contemplating the dangerous nature of such places, he quietly expressed regret that his father had not taught him more about labyrinths before disappearing. His late father had been a renowned labyrinth hunter by trade, though he had always insisted that his son lacked any real talent, leading the young man to believe he would never step foot inside one. 12 years ago, his father entered a labyrinth on a routine dive and never returned, leaving behind the grim truth that vanishing in the maze meant death. He couldn't comprehend why his father had been driven to reach the absolute lowest floor of the labyrinth, a perilously deep abyss beneath known territory, rather than remaining satisfied on safer, profitable floors with a weapon ill-suited for cramped quarters. Having already lost his mother to a fatal illness during his early childhood, the sudden loss of his father had left him utterly alone in the world. Recalling Eight's earnest plea for him to stay safe and turn back if things became too dangerous, a gentle resolve settled within him. He was determined never to experience that unbearable loneliness again. Returning to the present moment, he met her concerned gaze as she asked if something was bothering him, quickly reassuring her with a warm smile while thanking her for her deep knowledge. Catching her off guard with his sincere praise, she began to tremble with embarrassment, covering her flushed cheeks and flusteredly trying to deny the compliment. Continuing along their path, they finally arrived before the towering stone archway of the labyrinth, marveling at the bustling crowd of adventurers gathered at the entrance just as an abrupt voice shouted for them to wait. Approaching the grand archway leading into the cavernous stone entrance, Harold paused before an armored sentinel stationed at the threshold. Realizing this guard was tasked with overseeing access to the labyrinth, he inquired politely whether there was an entrance fee required to step inside. The guard held up a hand, clarifying that while entry was entirely free, He was stationed there to warn any brave adventurers. In response, the sentry revealed troubling news. Recent reports indicated that dangerous beasts normally lurking in the deep, lower floors of the labyrinth had begun appearing on the upper levels. He went on to explain that a night platoon had conducted a thorough search but found no concrete evidence, forcing them to temporarily suspend their investigation. Nevertheless, he cautioned the duo that the beasts could still be hiding within, urging them to proceed with utmost care. Turning to his partner, Harold leaned in close and quietly asked for her opinion on the situation, while she pondered the guard's words in thoughtful silence. He pointed out that while false reports were common among panicked travelers, it was entirely plausible that a few rogue monsters were indeed roaming free inside. Unfazed, she tightly clenched her fist against her chest, asserting that if monsters truly awaited them in the depths, they would simply destroy them, though she conceded they should stay vigilant. Before they could take another step, a group of brash adventurers shoved past them aggressively, barked orders for them to clear the path. Glaring back over his shoulder, one of the arrogant men mockingly asked if the pair was seeking a death wish, telling them to give up and head home while they still could. He stood stoically as the arrogant group surrounded him, their leader bursting into loud laughter and asking if he had lost his mind. The man mockingly compared him to Edwin Smith, the legendary hero and sword sage of the Shinryu Empire who had perished 15 years prior. At the mention of that name, his eyes widened in quiet shock. It had been a long time since he had last heard it spoken aloud, for Edwin Smith was his father. Unaware of the personal weight of his words, the taunting adventurer continued to scoff, declaring that comparing a mere boy like him to a legendary hero was nothing more than an absurd stretch. Shifting his attention away, the bully peered beneath the brim of the wide hat worn by the girl at his side, remarking with a smirk that she was actually quite cute. Emboldened, the man began ogling her figure and making vulgar remarks, eagerly beckoning her to come closer. But as the inappropriate comments left his mouth, the young warrior's face darkened, his eyes draining of all warmth in a flash of deadly rage. Before anyone could react to the sudden shift in atmosphere, he moved. In a blinding blur of speed, he leveled his spear and pressed the gleaming tip directly against the leader's throat. The sudden threat of death froze the arrogant man instantly. A strangled gasp escaped his throat as he felt the cold edge resting on his neck, his earlier bravado instantly evaporating into pure terror. Leaning closer with a terrifying, unblinking glare, he delivered a low, chilling ultimatum, demanding the man never look at his companion like that again unless he wished to lose his life. The sheer malice in his voice drove the helpless leader to scream in horror. The display of sheer speed and overwhelming killing intent left the rest of the party paralyzed with shock. Sweating profusely, they stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how completely they had misjudged their target. Realizing his life was on the line, the terrified leader threw up his hands in complete surrender, desperately pleading that he had only been joking. Lowering his stance, the young warrior nonchalantly questioned why they were so surprised, while the girl watched on with quiet amusement. He glanced nervously at his companion, bewildered by her dark, shadowed expression and wondering why she seemed so taken aback by his sudden display of force. A cold sweat broke out across his brow as he prayed she wasn't secretly furious with him, while she simply lowered her head, hiding her flustered gaze beneath the brim of her wide hat. With a smooth, swift motion, he withdrew his spear point from the trembling adventurer's throat, leaving the loudmouth gasping for breath in sheer shock. Turning away from the terrified group, he dismissively remarked that they had no time to waste on such people and signaled to move onward, prompting her to follow closely. Left behind in the corridor, the shaken adventurers stood in stunned silence, sweating nervously as they questioned if the others had even seen the speed of that attack. Terrified by how close they had come to death, they resolved never to cross his path again, recognizing that despite his novice appearance, he was far too dangerous. As they put distance between themselves and the group, he grumbled quietly about how troublesome people seemed to exist everywhere, while she silently walked beside him. Moments later, the pair descended into a vast underground labyrinth where the cavern walls and floor emitted a radiant glow, prompting him to marvel at the phenomenon while she hesitantly called his name. Stopping in her tracks, she gathered her resolve and softly expressed her deep gratitude for his actions earlier, catching him completely off guard as he turned to face her. Her face burning with an intense blush, she began rapidly whispering in a flustered ramble about how ecstatic she felt when he claimed her as his woman, though her hushed muttering was far too quiet for him to understand. She took aim down the pitch-black tunnel and pulled the trigger, unleashing a deafening gunshot that shattered the cave's stillness. She calmly announced that her shot had hit its mark, leaving him blinking in complete disbelief as silence returned to the passage. Approaching the slain reptilian monster, he stared in awe at the clean kill, wondering if her incredible senses would allow them to explore even deeper into the labyrinth. She explained that while she had previously navigated as far as the middle of the lower floors, taking on the deepest depths alone was impossible. He pieced her words together, asking if her past excursions meant she used to journey alongside a party of companions. He called out her name in concern as a sudden, heavy hesitation fell over her face. She softly confirmed his guess, admitting to having allies during her past on the Western continent as they continued onward together. Deep within the cavern beside the slain beast, the dark elf rested and began sharing her past, recalling how on the Western continent she had belonged to an all-female party dedicated to labyrinth exploration. She recalled her time among those companions, remembering how much they had endured together during their journeys. When her companion gently offered to let her stop if speaking of it was too painful, she expressed her gratitude for his thoughtfulness and decided to continue. She explained that their party leader had fallen in love with a man, funneling most of their hard-earned profits to him until their funds ran dry. The tragic betrayal culminated when she was drugged with sleeping pills, waking up trapped inside an iron cage to be sold off to a slave trader, a revelation that left her listener completely stunned. She noted that as a dark elf virgin, she commanded a steep price on the market, leaving the young man silent as he absorbed the horror of her story. He offered his sincere condolences, expressing disgust at how horribly her former leader had treated her. Pausing thoughtfully, she contemplated how different her life would have been if that fate had not unfolded. Looking toward him with a gentle blush, she realized that without that tragedy, she never would have been bound to such a kind master as Harold. She sat quietly in the dim light while her companion found himself thoroughly flustered by her earnest declaration, wondering how she could hold him in such high regard after so short a time. Shaking off his embarrassment, he determinedly turned his attention back to their harvest, resolving to do his absolute best to be a master worthy of her trust. As he set to work skinning the defeated monster, she watched his industrious hands with a gentle and admiring expression. Twiddling her fingers shyly, she quietly reflected on her feelings, realizing that her gratitude was rapidly evolving into something far deeper. Watching him labor so earnestly, she realized that if her heart truly succumbed to love, there was virtually nothing she would not do for his sake. Her loyalty was already undeniable, demonstrated through her sharp marksmanship during their battles in the cavern as she protected him while he hauled their heavy spoils. Emerging into a quieter tunnel, the pair paused before a large set of wooden double doors, prompting her to suggest that hidden treasure might lie just beyond. Although he had been ready to end their exploration for the day, he conceded that inspecting the mysterious room before heading home was a sound idea. Upon stepping through the doorway, a cluster of glowing magical butterflies suddenly fluttered around her, catching him entirely off guard. She gently held out her hand to explain that her magic conjured the butterflies to sense malice, allowing them to pinpoint hidden traps throughout the chamber. She explained to Harold that while she possessed a variety of utility spells, none were suited for direct combat. As her magical butterflies fluttered near the ancient doorway, she warned that traps still lay ahead. Hearing this, Harold realized that an untouched path meant undiscovered treasure might still be waiting beyond the archway, even if higher floors were heavily explored. Considering the untouched path, she mused that the treasure might have only recently materialized. When he expressed surprise, she shared the enigmatic lore of dungeons. The labyrinth was believed to possess a will of its own, collapsing sections days after their riches were claimed. Continuing to reflect on her words, he contemplated the mysterious nature of these deep chambers, recalling rumors that the labyrinth not only reset its traps and relocated treasure over time, but also spawned monsters within its halls. Stepping into a quiet chamber, Harold and Eight discover a uniquely crafted sword resting atop an ornate display stand, its ornate hilt hinting at something unusual. As they closely inspect the blade, the dark elf remarks that encountering a cursed weapon on the upper levels of the labyrinth is an exceedingly rare occurrence. Acknowledging his own limited knowledge of the labyrinth's secrets, he turns to her for guidance, eager to hear her perspective on how they should proceed. She explains that if the curse yields only harmful effects, the sword will be entirely useless and impossible to sell, adding that discerning its true nature demands high-level sorcery or specialized magical tools. Desiring to avoid unnecessary dangers, he suggests leaving the blade behind until they can secure proper identification equipment, though she points out that such specialized apparatuses are far from cheap. She notes that acquiring such tools would cost the equivalent of 15 years of savings spent on a house, leaving him stunned, before clarifying that deeper levels of the labyrinth could yield that same fortune in a single month of fortunate hunting. Convinced by her reasoning, he agrees that it is best not to dwell on what they cannot currently afford, resolving instead to advance safely and earn steadily for their ongoing journey, an approach she warmly approves. Bound by mutual trust and shared priorities, they exchange a gentle, reassuring smile with each other. With their plans settled, the pair steps out from the stone entrance, emerging side by side into the lively, bustling chatter of the town square. He paused alongside his dark elf companion, staring toward a swelling crowd gathered along the main street as inquisitive chatter filled the air. As the crowd surged, they watched a young nobleman parade an enslaved elven woman bound in heavy chains, drawing eager whispers from onlookers about his aristocratic background. The noble boasted loudly of his conquest, compelling the enslaved elf to display forced deference in front of the gathered spectators. Cruel laughter erupted from the mob as they openly mocked her helplessness, discussing her utility for both labyrinth exploration and sordid entertainment. Noticing his companion's visible distress at the distasteful scene, he gently shielded her view and guided her away from the commotion. Leaving the hostile crowd behind, the pair made their way down the peaceful cobblestone streets toward the town's merchant quarter. He brought her to a grand building, explaining that during his time as a silversmith's apprentice, his master frequently traded with this merchant company that purchased dungeon materials. Inside, they were greeted by Tosu, a courteous shop clerk who recognized the young adventurer and warmly asked how he could serve them today. In response, he unrolled a massive monster pelt onto the counter, stunning the merchant with the valuable haul brought back from the labyrinth. He stood before the trader, who voiced surprise at his sudden decision to become a labyrinth explorer and inquired about the sudden career change. Explaining that a great deal had occurred, he admitted that he urgently required funds to travel to the southern continent, with Eight standing quietly at his side. Finding that reason sufficient, the trader agreed to press no further into his personal affairs. The trader evaluated the pelts, valuing each Mograni fur at 1,500 rubes for a substantial total of 12,000 rubes, a sum that left the young man wide-eyed in astonishment. Looking at the box of coins, he realized this single haul paid nearly double his previous daily wage under his former master, filling him with hope that he could raise the required funds much faster than anticipated. Seizing the opportunity, he politely interrupted the trader to ask another question. He inquired about the travel costs required to reach the southern continent, prompting the merchant to pause and ponder the expense. Later, over a meal, he reviewed the trader's figures. A direct voyage to the southern continent cost 10 million rubes for 2 people, whereas crossing to the western continent cost 3 million rubes. Weighing their options, he reasoned that the expensive direct route was fraught with dangerous monsters from the undersea labyrinth, making the safer western route logical despite taking more time, requiring about 2 million additional rubes for expenses. With a confident smile, he concluded that 5 million rubes would cover their initial costs, finally giving him a clear target for their journey. He stood beside his partner as she took careful aim with her rifle, hunting monsters within the labyrinth. As they maintained their grueling routine, they hauled massive monster parts back to town and fought off fierce beasts along the way. After a hard day's work, the pair strolled peacefully through the sunlit city streets, content with their steady progress. Tallying their weekly profit, they calculated an income of roughly 170,000 rubes, leaving them with 120,000 rubes clear after covering all living expenses. Sitting down to discuss their travel fund, he suggested advancing to the middle levels of the labyrinth soon, and she readily agreed, confident in her ability to manage all other duties. With their goals aligned, they made a firm decision to begin exploring the middle levels starting the very next day. Looking at her cheerful expression in that quiet moment, he had no idea of the grim challenge awaiting them ahead. Far below, in the pitch-black darkness of the dungeon's deeper reaches, a sinister threat lay hidden. Unbeknownst to either of them, a dangerous entity growled from the shadows, poised to cross their path. As they venture deeper into the rocky caverns on their way to the middle floors, Harold wonders what challenges await them, but Eight suddenly comes to an abrupt stop, making him turn back in concern. Looking around with uneasy eyes, she admits that a strange, uncomfortable feeling has come over her in this cavern. Thinking it might just be the oppressive dungeon air, he tries to reassure her, but her senses pick up heavy, rhythmic thuds shaking the ground as she shouts for them to hide. Hurrying into the shadows, the pair watch in silence as massive, thunderous footsteps echo through the corridor right past their location. Before their very eyes, a colossal, armored creature lumbers through the narrow tunnel, leaving them frozen in sheer dread at its overwhelming size. As the heavy vibrations slowly fade into the distance, she realizes that the creature was an earth dragon, reminding him of the shopkeeper's earlier warning about lower-floor monsters wandering into upper areas. Filled with remorse for not taking the warning seriously, he apologizes, while she examines her rifle and notes that standard bullets would not even leave a scratch on its impenetrable hide. Unwilling to risk another deadly encounter in the middle floors, he suggests they turn back and head home for now, a proposal she immediately agrees to without hesitation. He and his dark elf companion froze as a frantic cry for help echoed through the rocky cavern behind them. Turning back, they saw a panicked adventurer stumbling toward them in sheer desperation, weeping as he pleaded for assistance against a high-level monster. The frantic man breathlessly explained that his party of 4 had been hiding in a crevice when the beast ambushed them, and it now stood guard outside, waiting to devour those trapped inside. Weighing the grim reality, the young adventurer realized that seeking backup from the surface would take far too long, and hardly anyone in town possessed the strength to defeat such a threat. With a heavy heart, he reached out toward the weeping man and bowed his head, offering a quiet, remorseful apology for his inability to intervene. In sheer agony, the man grabbed his hand, weeping bitterly as he begged him to rethink, revealing that several of his trapped companions had young children waiting for them back home. The mention of orphaned children struck a deep chord within him, triggering a vivid memory of his own past as a helpless child left behind in the world. Driven by the emotional weight of those memories, he tightly clenched his gloved fist, his resolve hardening in an instant. Looking up with firm eyes, he asked the startled adventurer where his companions were located, ready to face whatever danger lay ahead. He stood silent for a moment as the frantic adventurer begged for assistance, while his companion watched in disbelief. With a soft, heavy sigh, his decision was made. Acknowledging that children were waiting for a safe return, he admitted how frustrating the situation was, yet declared he had no choice but to intervene. Mentioning a secret weapon, he suddenly bolted ahead down the dark cavern path at full speed, leaving his companion frantically calling after him as he asked her to look after him if he collapsed. Advancing with swift, light steps, the young warrior moved stealthily across the uneven ground, gripping his short spear in readiness. Ahead of him, a colossal earth dragon prowls through the cavernous rift, growling softly as it searches for its prey. Observing the giant beast from behind cover, he realizes the monster is lurking right outside a deep cavern opening, patiently waiting for the 4 trapped adventurers to emerge. As the ground trembles under the weight of the massive creature, he confirms that this is the sole monster threatening the party, meaning drawing its full attention will be a straightforward task. Exploiting the monster's arrogant focus on its trapped prey, he glides into position behind it, tightening his grip on his spear with absolute conviction that its carelessness will be its downfall. Summoning a terrifying force from another dimension, every nerve and muscle throughout his body tightens against the sheer recoil as energy surges through him, tearing at his flesh and overwhelming his mind. channeling this destructive energy straight into his weapon. His eyes widened with intense determination as the immense heat and pressure caused the metal tip of his spear to sizzle and melt. From afar, the dark elf senses the terrifying nature of his power, recognizing that it is entirely distinct from normal magic, a chaotic, unbridled torrent that should never exist within this world. Sweat dripping down his strained face. His heart thumps violently in his chest as the unbearable burden of holding such otherworldly power threatens to crush him. He collapsed face first onto the cavern floor, the immense strain of channeling dimensional power finally overwhelming his body. Atai cried out in alarm and rushed to his side as he lay motionless. Opening his eyes moments later, he found his head resting on something surprisingly soft. Looking up to meet Atai's anxious eyes, she asked if he was awake, explaining that she had followed him into the cavern after growing worried when he suddenly ran off. Sitting up to reassure her, he insisted that he was fine, though the deep concern lingering in her wide eyes showed she was not easily convinced. As he checked his hands, he admitted to feeling slightly dizzy, though he doubted there would be any lasting harm. Atai countered by recounting how terrified she felt seeing him collapse and cough up blood, forcing him to brush it off as mere sudden exhaustion. Unwilling to drop the matter, she passionately begged him to promise to take better care of himself next time. He reluctantly agreed before quickly steering the conversation away, asking about the status of the rescued party. Nearby, the rescued adventurers approached with humbled expressions, bowing their heads in deep gratitude and offering sincere apologies for their earlier hostility. Tears welled in the eyes of one man as he confessed he had feared he would never see his child again, a heartfelt moment that shared a quiet sense of relief between the two companions. Turning his gaze toward the massive fallen earth dragon, he expressed a desire to harvest parts of the beast to sell, though he lamented how difficult it would be to butcher such tough, armor-like hide. Hearing his dilemma, she gently reminded him that while dragon metal scales were indeed near indestructible, he had already blasted a giant hole straight through the creature's defenses. Looking up together at the gaping, molten hole blasted into the beast's chest, they stared in awe at the undeniable proof of his extraordinary power. In the aftermath of the devastating battle, the young companions stared in quiet awe at the sheer destruction left behind by his powerful attack, the blazing continent-piercing spear. Turning to him with a stern and protective gaze, she strictly forbade him from using the technique ever again, reminding him that the skill rendered him unconscious every time he unleashed it. Sensing the sincerity in her plea, he quietly promised to refrain from relying on it, though their conversation was soon cut short when a voice called out to them. Approaching with eager gratitude, the rescued group of adventurers insisted on helping carry the fallen monster back to town as a small gesture to repay the debt of saving their lives. As he looked down at the massive corpse of the deep-layer creature, he could not help but wonder what kind of high bounty such a formidable beast would command at the counter. Upon bringing the materials to the counter, the clerk calculated the total value and nonchalantly declared a payout of 13 million rubes, causing his jaw to drop in complete shock. Observing his pale and frozen expression, his dark elf companion grew deeply concerned and checked on his health, though he could barely squeak out a response. Reeling from the colossal fortune placed before him, he finally understood why so many brave souls were lured into the dangers of the labyrinth, while the clerk requested his banking information to deposit the astronomical sum. He carefully signed his name onto the bank document, reflecting on how physically demanding his special technique had been after so long, yet satisfied that the reward was well worth the toll on his body. 2 days passed in the bustling city as the official paperwork was processed behind the scenes. When he finally opened his financial passbook, he stared in utter disbelief at the recorded balance, confirming that 13 million rubes had indeed been transferred to his account. The sheer weight of that astronomical figure materialized in his thoughts as towering stacks of paper currency, a sum far beyond anything he had anticipated. A warm sense of relief washed over him as a bright smile broke across his face, realizing that they now possessed more than enough funds to secure passage on the ship. Returning home shortly after, he greeted Atai and placed a freshly bought peach tart on the table as a sweet surprise. Her eyes widened with overwhelming delight, sparkling with pure joy at the sight of her favorite treat. He warmly explained that he wanted to bring her something special for staying home today, and she eagerly lifted a piece to take her first bite. Chewing happily with flushed cheeks, she fanned her face in absolute bliss, gushing about how delicious it was while he watched with a satisfied smile. While she enjoyed the dessert, he laid out their next steps, explaining that with enough money finally saved, they would be departing for the port city the very next morning. He confirmed that the horse-drawn carriage waiting before them was indeed their ride to the port city. Boarding the coach together, he explained the next leg of their journey, noting that from the port they would board a ship to reach the southern continent by way of the western continent. The heavy coach rattled along the dusty dirt road, carrying them away from the town and across the wide, open plains. As the countryside blurred past outside the carriage window, he gazed out silently at the passing landscape, lost in thought. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, he marveled at how unpredictable his life had become, never anticipating he would find himself on such a path after all they had survived. Breaking the quiet, he remarked on the unpredictability of the world before asking her about the western continent, knowing she had been there before. His question made her hesitate, an uneasy expression flitting across her face as she struggled to put her thoughts into words. She clarified that while she did not view the continent negatively, its vibrant diversity of distinct races frequently brought friction and conflict alongside its rich culture. Sensing her hesitation, he gently assured her that there was no need to apologize and suggested she could tell him more whenever she felt ready. Relieved by his warmth, she smiled and softly agreed. Looking up at him with bright, affection-filled eyes, she felt a profound surge of happiness, cherished by the knowledge that he truly relied on her presence. Further along the road, Cecil spotted the approaching carriage and called out excitedly to her grandfather, pointing toward the vehicle they had been waiting for. Confirming it was the transport headed for the harbor, Cecil and Varen boarded the coach, surprising Harold and Atai as the new companions joined them for the journey ahead. Varen leaned in close, staring intently into the young traveler's eyes as he tried to recall where he had seen him before. Continuing his train of thought, he mused that the man he remembered couldn't possibly be so young if he were still alive today. He went on to recall that the warrior was a formidable combatant, someone his own son couldn't defeat, though he admitted he couldn't remember his name or picture him with such a gentle expression. Pointing at the weapon on the youth's back, the old man added that the warrior had also wielded a spear. With a sudden smack to his back, the young woman scolded her grandfather for his rudeness, forcing him to wince and confess that his memory had grown unreliable lately. She immediately tested him by asking if he could even remember his own name, to which he nonchalantly replied with his full name, Varen Myers. Pushing him further, she demanded to know if he knew who she was, and he effortlessly produced her name, Cecil. When she asked for his son's name, he promptly answered Gergo, a name that immediately struck a chord of familiarity in the young traveler's mind. Realizing he had merely been teasing, she bowed deeply in embarrassment to apologize for his antics, while the old man offered a sheepish apology of his own. Her frustration was evident as her grandfather chuckled, lightheartedly complaining about how often she lost her temper with him. As the old man sat back in the carriage, he wondered aloud how many more outbursts he would face before reaching the western continent, a destination that instantly piqued the interest of the young traveler across from him. Realizing their shared trajectory as the carriage wheels clattered loudly against the dirt road, the old man inquired if they too were bound for the western continent. Upon learning that they were indeed heading the same way, he warmly declared that they would be traveling companions for the duration of the ride, a prospect his energetic granddaughter thoroughly approved of. The young swordsman welcomed the idea with a pleasant smile, expressing his delight at sharing the journey with them. Their journey progressed smoothly along winding mountain passes, the rhythmic clatter of carriage wheels echoing across the sweeping rural landscape. Breaking the tranquil silence of the ride, the dark elf girl softly addressed him, catching him slightly off guard. They eventually arrived at a sprawling coastal city bustling with trade and majestic sailing ships. As they stepped out of the carriage, the old man bid them a fond farewell, while his granddaughter suggested they look into booking passage on a vessel named the Balestia. Waving goodbye, the pair watched as their travel companions departed down the stone-paved street, leaving them to begin their search. Standing alone among the bustling town buildings, she asked what their next move should be, to which he advised finding a reasonably priced ship after exploring the docks. Approaching a ticket agent at the harbor, the veteran mariner reassured them that fortune was on their side, gesturing toward the harbor where dozens of vessels stood ready to set sail westward. He detailed the options available, explaining that standard fare on the Balestia would run 2.8 million rubes for a small private room and meals during a month-long voyage. Alternatively, a shared hold with dozens of passengers offered a far cheaper rate, though under filthy and far less pleasant conditions. The agent cheerfully urged them to return once they had made up their minds, pointing out that all departing vessels were still a full week away from leaving the harbor. Stepping out into the bright harbor street, the young traveler balked at the astronomical cost of luxury passage, deciding to weigh their choices over the next few days while his companion suggested finding a local place to eat and stay. Suddenly, a passerby slammed violently directly into him. Before he could recover his footing, a young urchin darted away carrying his pack, boasting over his shoulder as he made off with more than 10 million rubes tucked inside. A sudden explosion detonated in the cobblestone directly ahead of the fleeing thief, halting his escape in a cloud of dust before a firm hand seized him by the back of his collar. Holding the trembling boy firmly off the ground, the traveler demanded the immediate return of his stolen belongings. Glancing back in astonishment, he realized the dark elf had fired a warning shot from her long-barreled rifle, casually reassuring him that she had purposefully missed the child. Her expression transformed into a chilling, menacing glare, warning the terrified boy that stealing from her companion was an unforgivable offense regardless of his age. Inspecting the boy more closely, they noticed his ragged, filthy clothing and the foul odor clinging to him. When the young thief angrily snapped at them, she firmly confronted him, demanding why he felt entitled to steal and asking if he was simply in desperate need of money. As she cornered the young thief, the confrontation was suddenly interrupted by a distressed woman running toward them, calling out the boy's name, Matsuda. The boy recoiled in shock at his mother's sudden arrival, while Harold demanded an explanation. Kowtowing before them, the mother bowed low, profusely apologizing and promising to discipline her son severely. Harold assured her that he had recovered his stolen funds, though he warned her that without proper guidance, the boy's bad habits would only grow worse. Ashamed and frustrated, the boy shouted at his mother to be quiet as she helplessly admitted her struggles to control him. Driven by desperation and tears, the young boy shouted that money was the only way to solve their family's troubles, desperate to help his father and clear their overwhelming debts. Without waiting for a response, he bolted into the street, sprinting away as his mother, Harold, and Najii desperately called out after him. After watching the young boy rejoin his mother, she remained quiet and thoughtful. Noticing her mood, he suggested finding lodging for the night, to which she agreed. They searched through town, encountering full or renovating inns, until they finally found an establishment with a single remaining room. The innkeeper guided them inside, explaining that while small, the room contained a double bed suitable for two. Upon entering, he remarked on the tight space, while his companion stared in wide-eyed shock at the single shared bed. The two pillows positioned side by side left no room to misinterpret the sleeping arrangement. Her face turned bright red with embarrassment as the reality of the situation fully registered. Seeing her discomfort, he offered to sleep on the floor and considered taking a bath first. She flusteredly stammered that he wasn't dirty, while he wondered if a hot bath might help him think. She admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly, that because the small room felt so confined, she also wanted to take a bath first. He wondered silently if she was concerned about her own scent in such tight quarters, though it did not bother him at all, leaving her completely flustered. Overcome with embarrassment, she bolted straight into the washroom and shut the door tight, leaving him standing alone in sheer confusion. Sometime later, relaxed after his own soothing bath, he reflected on his past travels across the northeastern continent while wondering how many days remained before reaching Tawakkul. Overhearing a pair of travelers nearby, he caught their conversation about their upcoming journey, with one mentioning it had been over a decade since he last visited the beautiful region. The mood shifted as the travelers began discussing unsettling rumors that had been spreading since their ship arrived, hinting that the Empire was quietly mobilizing its army. They expressed deep worry that an impending war might block the main roads. noting how numerous witnesses had observed strange military movements across the land. Dismissing the grim political gossip, he walked back toward his room, confident that any imperial conflict would not concern him once he departed the continent. Feeling the heavy weight of exhaustion, he threw himself face down onto the soft mattress, opting to claim the bed for the night. As deep fatigue washed over his body following the warm bath, he conceded that sleeping on the hard floor after such a grueling trip was out of the question. He lay sprawled across the double bed, trying to convince himself that sharing a mattress with his travel companion was completely normal and nothing to be anxious about. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Najii stepped back into the bedroom, her cheeks flushed reddish pink after her warm bath. She leaned directly over him as he lay on the mattress, her face inches from his as she softly whispered to check if he had already fallen asleep. Startled by her sudden proximity, he stammered out a flustered reassurance that he had no intention of doing anything untoward or scaring her. Before he could finish his nervous explanation, she climbed onto the bed and pulled herself tightly against his chest, confirming with a blush that she was glad he was awake. He froze in panic, wildly overthinking her passivity and wondering if she was simply submitting to him because of her status as a slave rather than her own actual desire. Looking closely into her eyes, he wrestled with the agonizing uncertainty of what she truly felt toward him beneath her quiet demeanor. As she softly confessed her nervousness about embarking on a passenger ship for the first time and asked him to be gentle with her, he completely misconstrued her emotional words as a sensual surrender, panicking over how to redirect the conversation. Seeking an immediate escape from the romantic tension, he blurted out that they should focus on discussing which vessel they were going to board the next morning. She blinked in total bewildered silence, utterly stunned by his completely unromantic and sudden shift in topic. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed while her companion thoughtfully calculated their schedule, noting that although they still had a full week before the ships departed, waiting too long risked all the tickets selling out. Seeing her cheeks puffed out in a childish sulk, he completely overlooked her frustration and eagerly explained that after much deliberation, he felt the vessel named Balestia was their best option. Bewildered by his utter obliviousness to her romantic mood, the young elf could only offer a flustered groan as he rattled off logistics, explaining that the ship was fairly conventional, fit their budget perfectly at 3 million robes, and matched what their acquaintances had recommended. Yielding to his practical breakdown, she begrudgingly conceded that choosing that vessel seemed safe and sensible, prompting him to cheerfully agree that the price was neither too cheap nor exorbitant, but just right. With their choice finalized, he reached out and suggested buying the tickets the next morning, leaving her to nod in tired resignation. The moment the conversation ended, the dark elf flopped onto her side and turned her back on him, leaving him scratching his head in complete bewilderment over her sudden coldness. Deciding it was time for sleep, he slipped beneath the covers behind her and wrapped his arms firmly around her waist, rationalizing to himself that holding her in bed was perfectly natural for a master. Shocked by his sudden boldness, her face flushed intensely as she fumed in silence, inwardly venting that if he was going to embrace her so intimately, he ought to go all the way. Yet despite her outer indignation, she quickly melted into his embrace, nestling tightly against him as a wave of immense secret satisfaction washed over her. As they settled beneath the warm blanket, he held her close and marveled at her gentle softness before quietly drifting off to sleep by her side. He arrived at the harbor ticket office alongside his companion, ready to finalize their travel arrangements across the sea. He agreed without hesitation as the weathered agent quoted a total of 2.8 million rubes for 2 passenger passes. He watched as the agent slid the official boarding passes across the wooden desk, informing them that the ship would set sail in precisely 5 days at noon. He took note as the ticket master added that they were free to board immediately to check their quarters and store their luggage, though he made sure to warn that missed departures were strictly non-refundable. Taking the tickets, he and his companion made their way down to the sunlit docks where vessels of all sizes rocked gently upon the harbor waters. He looked up at the impressive hull of the Balestia before handing their passes to the attendant on deck, who expressed pleasant surprise that they had obtained room 310, a prime cabin likely freed up by a sudden cancellation. He pushed open the door to cabin 310, allowing his dark elf companion to step inside first to survey the furnished interior. She gasped out his name in delight, her cheeks flushing bright red as the extraordinary feature of the room caught her completely by surprise. She darted excitement-filled steps across the wooden floor, drawn instantly toward a large glass pane integrated seamlessly into the far wall. She pressed her hands against the glass in pure awe, marveling at the vibrant ocean life swimming right outside their submerged window while he watched her with a gentle smile. As she pressed against the glass, utterly enthralled by the marine life swimming right outside their room, Harold realized this was the submerged view the ship's crew had mentioned. Seeing how deeply engrossed she was in the underwater display, he decided not to disturb her, opting instead to wander around the ship alone. Stepping out into the wooden corridor of the ship's interior, he was abruptly brought to a halt when a familiar voice called out to him from behind. Turning around, he found Cecil waving enthusiastically, cheerfully explaining that she had ended up on the same vessel after finding no other suitable ships. Wondering where her grandfather was, he asked about the old man, only for her to playfully reveal that he was taking a nap. Since they were aboard the same ship, she eagerly proposed that they go explore the surrounding port city together for a while. Ignoring his confusion over her sudden idea, she grabbed him firmly by the hand and practically dragged him along. Once out in the city streets, she immediately treated herself to a bite of local food, practically radiating joy with every chew. Walking alongside him through the town, she devoured the snack with delight while he looked on, amused by her enthusiasm. Holding out the treat toward him, she offered him a taste, but he quickly raised his hands to decline, insisting she finish it herself. He slowed his pace as Cecil abruptly stopped and turned back to face him, asking what was wrong. She brought up their earlier ride in the carriage, noting how her grandfather Varen seemed to have taken a peculiar liking to him. Continuing her thought, she explained that while her grandfather was friendly, he rarely engaged in so much small talk with people he didn't care for. He listened quietly, unsure of what to make of the old man's sudden warmth. Suddenly, without warning, her posture shifted as her hand flew to her hilt, drawing her sword with a swift, aggressive slash aimed directly at him. Reacting in a fraction of a second, he intercepted her blade with his own, the sudden clash of steel sending sparks through the air as he smoothly parried her attack, leaving her stunned by his reflexes. Still shaken by the unexpected clash, he blurted out that her sudden strike had been extremely dangerous. She only offered a confident grin in response, casually claiming she had total control and was planning to stop her blade short all along. Catching his breath after the swift clash, the young swordsman noted how seamlessly his opponent had deflected his strike rather than dodging it, marveling at the reckless precision behind her moves. She maintained her firm, balanced grip on her weapon, her posture radiant with natural martial talent that left him thoroughly impressed. Curious about her unexpected aggression, he lowered his guard and asked why she had chosen to challenge him so suddenly in the narrow alley. With a confident smirk, she explained that since her grandfather held high expectations for him, she felt compelled to personally test his martial prowess. Winking playfully, she promised not to spring any more surprise attacks on him, though he couldn't help but look upon her assurances with a touch of lingering skepticism. Just as they agreed to head back toward the docks together, their conversation was shattered by desperate screams for help from a young boy fleeing through the plaza. Recognizing the urchin from earlier, he realized in horror that the boy was being pursued and snatched away in broad daylight, driving him to act immediately. Before he could even call out, his spirited companion dashed ahead in pursuit of the captors without a second thought, prompting him to sprint right behind her. He listened in mild surprise as Cecil suddenly offered words of praise, noting that his gentle facial features belied a strength capable of backing up his character, offering the compliment just in case he needed a reminder. She suddenly gasped upon spotting a small rowboat moored at the edge of the dock, her mind instantly shifting into action while he looked on in quiet realization. With no time to lose, the pair scrambled down onto the wooden craft, their arrival startling the oarsmen as they prepared to set off across the water. Cursing under his breath at how much ground they had lost, he gripped the pushing pole firmly, determined to close the gap before the captors vanished completely into the mist. As they rowed hard against the current, she casually dismissed any concern over commandeering the vessel, promising to pay back the owner later as long as they pushed ahead at full speed. Upon reaching the jagged shoreline of a secluded island, he carefully peered around a towering cliff face to observe several large merchant ships docked in secret. The hidden cove revealed itself to be an extensive operations base, equipped with multiple piers and heavy vessels anchored deep within the natural bay. Surveying the imposing fleet, he noted the sheer scale of the enemy presence, realizing that Matsuda's captors belonged to a well-organized criminal network. Fired up with righteous fury, she declared her intention to storm the hideout and make them regret their actions, forcing him to urge caution and suggest securing their immediate surroundings first. Gazing out over the tranquil horizon, he contemplated the daunting task ahead, fully aware that a single misstep in this hostile territory could cost the young boy his life. He scanned the shoreline where a small rowboat rested against the bank, questioning whether it belonged to simple fishermen or the kidnappers. Venturing deeper into the island's forest, his companion voiced her frustration, wondering where the bandits could possibly be hiding on such a vast terrain. Suddenly, she stumbled through the thick underbrush with a startled cry, nearly tumbling headfirst into the foliage. Catching her before she could fall, he gently held her back, warning her that rushing blindly would yield no clues before pointing toward the ground. Imprinted upon the flattened grass were distinct tracks, with fresh mud that had not yet dried. Examining the evidence, he concluded that someone had passed through very recently. While she sheepishly insisted she had already noticed the trail. Noticing her embarrassment, he offered a warm apology, though she quietly murmured that he didn't need to apologize. Continuing along the fresh trail, they soon emerged before a massive, secluded stone building hidden within the dense woods. Approaching the entrance, he observed that the footprints ended right at the doorway, confirming that the captors were inside. He felt a chilling presence loom out of the shadows, a dark entity with a gleaming, singular eye issuing a stark decree that they needed him. Immediately following this ominous warning, a strange, stone-armored monstrosity began crawling slowly out of the surrounding darkness. As heavy raindrops began to fall from the overcast sky, Harold held out his hand in surprise just before a sudden downpour drenched the surrounding woods. Ignoring his warnings, Cecil dashed ahead toward the shelter of a stone structure, desperate to escape the relentless deluge while he called out for her to wait. Catching up to her outside the heavy wooden door, he pointed out that forcing their way inside could alert potential enemies, but she dismissed his caution, complaining about her soaked clothes and carelessly suggesting they simply defeat anyone in their path. Fortunately, they discovered an open window higher up the stone wall, allowing them to slip quietly inside and catch their breath out of the rain. Crouching low among the massive storage barrels, she questioned why they couldn't simply eliminate any obstacles, but he gently reminded her that their true objective was rescuing the young boy, urging her to avoid unnecessary conflict. She reluctantly agreed with a sigh, comparing his scolding tone to her grandfather's, when a sudden sound deeper in the room caused him to freeze and whisper a warning. Peering through the gloom, they spotted a group of rough, armed men gathered around tables and barrels in the dimly lit cellar. Overhearing the conversation, the companions learned that these men had caught the young thief and intended to punish him severely for attempting to steal their goods. With a cold glare, the sinister man declared his intention to hand the captive boy over directly to their leader. From behind cover, the young swordsman overheard the thugs' unsettling conversation. The dark-haired man remarked that their leader had a sinister penchant for young boys, while his companion chuckled, recalling how half of the captives had fled in sheer terror. Laughing callously, the bearded mercenary admitted he was eager to hear the young captive weep, prompting his partner to make a dry, sarcastic comment about his vile sense of entertainment. He quickly pieced together the situation, realizing the young thief had been caught trying to steal from these men, only for his companions to abandon him. Disgust welled up within the young swordsman as he recognized the sheer cruelty of the captors. Suddenly, one of the thugs called out in confusion upon noticing a tall spear leaning right against the very barrels hiding the group. Cold sweat broke out across his face as he stared in shock at the weapon, desperately wishing it had been stowed away properly before drawing attention. Fortunately, the dark-haired criminal interceded, warning his partner not to touch the spear without knowing who owned it, keeping him from investigating further. Agreeing with the precaution, the man relented and suggested they move along, allowing the young swordsman to exhale a quiet sigh of relief as the danger passed. With their suspicions dismissed, the group of criminals ambled further into the hideout, completely oblivious to the intruders lingering just feet away. Once the coast was clear, the young woman leaned in to tease him about carelessly leaving his weapon in plain sight, forcing him to reluctantly admit his blunder while pleading for a gentler tone. Stepping silently from their hiding place behind the barrels, they set off in stealthy pursuit of the thugs. He pressed himself and his companion against the hallway wall as two guards ambled past in search of the missing boy, remarking quietly on the vast size of the underground hideout. As the guards shuffled further down the corridor, she whispered to get his attention, pointing toward an arched stone doorway that led into a quiet chamber. Entering the room, her eyes immediately caught a peculiar object resting on a soft cushion atop an ornate cabinet, causing her to point it out in surprise. She leaned in, realizing it appeared to be a massive egg, but both of them gasped when the smooth shell suddenly began to tremble and wobble on its perch. Before either could react, sharp cracks rapidly spread across the surface of the shell as whatever was trapped inside fought to break free. Suddenly, a strange creature burst forth from the egg and darted directly under her clothing, startling her completely. She screamed and squirmed in panic as the creature wriggled against her, her loud outer cries instantly alerting the guards in the outer hallway. Realizing their cover had been blown, he panicked as footsteps echoed closer and the guards shouted that they were rushing into the room. The guards barged through the door and scanned the dark room, finding the cabinet seemingly abandoned with no intruder in plain sight. Concealed in the darkness above, he held her tightly against him and clamped his hand over her mouth, listening intently as the guards concluded nothing had been stolen and departed. His heart hammered in his chest as he kept a tight hold on Cecil, trying to suppress her sudden gasp when the sound of approaching guards echoed into the room. Stepping up to the pedestal, the intruders froze in shock upon finding the mysterious shell split wide open, shouting to each other in disbelief that the egg was shattered. Looking down at the scattered fragments littering the stone floor, they began to question whether the creature inside had truly managed to hatch and break free on its own. As the discussion continued, the guards debated whether the hatchling could survive on its own, growing increasingly anxious over where the newborn beast might be hiding in the shadows. One of the men scratched his head in stress, recalling that their leader had gone through great lengths to retrieve the artifact from a distant location. Just inches away in the darkness, the girl stifled her groans of discomfort against his gloved hand while the guards realized the severe punishment awaiting them if they failed to retrieve it. Desperate as the creature squirmed deeper into her clothes, she pleaded through muffled gasps to be released, but he frantically warned her that any sound would spell their immediate doom. Trapped together in the stifling dark, he tightened his grip over her face and pulled her body close, enduring the frantic tickling of the tiny beast to maintain absolute silence. Trapped inside the narrow wooden cabinet, Harold held Cecil tightly against his chest, struggling to keep her quiet as he frantically searched for the item hidden beneath her top while she squirmed in confusion. As his hand slipped further inside her tunic, her breath hitched in embarrassment as the slippery object slid past her waist, forcing him to scramble after it. With a sudden flick of his wrist, he finally secured the small stone, allowing both of them to sink back against the cabinet wall with a collective sigh of relief as she softly apologized for her panic. Glancing over at her flushed face, he tried to reassure her that there was no need to dwell on what had just happened, noticing that she was still visibly shaken by the close encounter. Meanwhile, just outside their hiding spot, two rummaging thieves eventually grew frustrated with their fruitless search, deciding to abandon the room after concluding that the missing item would likely turn up later when sorting their stolen loot. Once the footsteps faded into the distance, he carefully pushed open the closet doors and stepped back, offering a prompt apology for holding her so tightly, which left her flustered as she teased him about how long he had intended to stay wrapped around her. Rubbing the back of his neck with an awkward smile, he continued to express his sincere regret for the embarrassing position he had forced her into, while she softly muttered under her breath that she wasn't truly angry with him. When he asked if she had spoken, she quickly turned her gaze aside, quietly brushing off her words with a subtle whisper. Shifting his attention back to the task at hand, he held up the strange dark object he had retrieved from her clothing, pondering what this mysterious artifact could possibly be. He carefully cradled the small, segmented stone serpent in his gloved hands, observing its surprisingly expressive reptilian eyes. As the creature let out a low chirping sound, Harold warned it that if the intruders found it, they would undoubtedly sell it off. What truly caught his attention, however, was its unusual body structure, as he noted aloud that it looked far from an ordinary snake. Driven by curiosity, he directly asked the small stone creature if it could actually understand his words. To his amazement, the serpent gave a firm, rhythmic nod in response, letting out a cheerful cry to confirm its comprehension. Astonished by its intelligence, Cecil praised the creature while Harold warmly invited the clever serpent to join their journey. Although Cecil admitted the creature made her slightly uneasy after everything they had endured, Harold reasoned that its ability to understand them meant it would cause no trouble. As the snake happily coiled onto Harold's neck with a cheerful chirp, Cecil watched in disbelief while he confessed his growing fondness for their new companion. Moving deeper into the structure, they carefully avoided a group of armed men marching through the cold stone corridor. Reaching the top floor, the duo stood before a massive double door, knowing that the only unexplored room lay just beyond it. He froze as agonized screams echoed from beyond the heavy doors, instantly recognizing the boy's voice and realizing their covert rescue plan was ruined. Force was now their only option. Cecil immediately pressed him for a plan, and he grimly confirmed that they would have to break through the barrier by brute force. Proposing a clear division of labor, he urged her to rush in and grab the child the moment they breached the room, prompting her puzzled inquiry as to why. He explained that a loud entrance would draw out all the enemy's henchmen, making it impossible for him to fight at full strength if the child remained caught in the crossfire. She countered forcefully, arguing that as the stronger fighter, they should fight side by side and overpower the enemy together. Reassuring her with a calm smile, he insisted that he couldn't unleash his full martial potential while guarding a bystander, explicitly placing his faith in her execution of the rescue. Flustered by his confidence, she reluctantly conceded to his strategy, agreeing to grab the boy and flee while he prepared for the breach. As the commotion began, several panic-stricken guards scattered and fled the room, leaving the path clear. Drawing his blade, he focused intently on the looming threat, ready to strike down the monstrous leader before them. He stood firm alongside Cecil, silent as she acknowledged the grim reality. The demonic entity smirked wickedly, taunting the intruders as they braced themselves for combat. Facing the formidable half-demon spider creature, Harold boldly declared that he and Cecil would be taking the boy back, refusing to let him be cocooned. The monster demanded to know who dared interrupt her. She scoffed at their interference, explaining that the boy had attempted to steal her precious merchandise and would pay dearly with his life. She boasted that her rare medicine, worth at least 50 million rubes, could cure any sickness, making his crime unforgivable. Hearing this, the young swordsman finally understood the child's true motive. Unable to afford such astronomical costs legally, the desperate boy had relied on his own speed to steal the cure and save his dying father. Although he despised these brutal pirates and their demonic leader, he acknowledged that interrupting her so rudely had pushed her over the edge. Enraged by their defiance, the Spider Queen gathered dark energy, vowing to show them no mercy. Before she could unleash her power, Cecil charged in, her fists clashing against the beast's razor-sharp spider appendages. Sparks flew as the warrior struggled against the monster's incredible durability, drawing furious shrieks from her opponent. Seizing the opening, he swung his heavy blade directly into the demon's arm, only for the attack to ring out with a metallic clang. Realizing her body was as dense as solid steel, he stepped back as she turned her vicious glare onto him. Suddenly, a massive blur tore through the room with a deafening roar, hurtling forward with unstoppable force. Before the monster could react, the overwhelming blow slammed directly into her torso, crushing her beneath an immense impact that sent shockwaves rippling across the chamber floor. Pinned violently against the crumbling wall by the sheer weight of the strike, she gasped in total disbelief, her eyes wide with shock. Observing the aftermath, Harold reasoned that despite the heavy impact, Her hardened shell had likely absorbed most of the damage. Turning his gaze to the side, he noticed Matsuda lying safely away from the fray, relieved that Cecil's maneuver had bought them precious time. While he kept the monster's attention focused on himself, his companion seized the opportunity, grabbing both the young boy and the medicine before vaulting back across the balcony. The spider demon shrieked in furious disbelief as her captive was snatched away in an instant. Enraged by the sudden loss, the monster's body darkened with violent malice as she screamed death threats at the fleeing pair. Realizing she could not catch them alone, she bellowed commands to her subordinate thugs outside, demanding they rush in immediately to assist. As her men flooded the chamber, the creature directed their fury elsewhere, ordering them to hunt down the woman and the child who had fled with the stolen cure. Unhesitatingly, the mob turned on their heels, charging out into the corridors in hot pursuit. Watching the mob scurry off after his companion, he merely smirked in amused, quiet confidence. He knew full well that a handful of ordinary thugs stood no chance against her formidable combat skills, thinking to himself that they ought to worry about their own survival instead. His brief moment of calm vanished as the remaining horde, rallied by their furious mistress, redirected their bloodlust entirely toward him. Surrounded on all sides by armed men howling for his life, he realized that the bulk of the enemy forces had decided to make him their sole target. Surrounded on all sides, Harold swept his spear in a wide arc, forcing back the throng of hostile fighters. With sharp, practiced movements, he delivered a crushing kick to an approaching adversary, keeping the overwhelming numbers at bay through relentless martial technique. Continuing his defensive assault, he dropped low to sweep the legs of another attacker, sending him crashing into the cobblestones. Watching from the sidelines, the half-demon boss spat out a curse, frustrated by how remarkably resilient her opponent proved to be against her men. As the combat paused briefly, he caught his breath, privately wondering how long this clash had been dragging on. Scarcely an hour, though it felt far longer. When the remaining thugs bellowed demands for him to drop to his knees and die, he dryly requested that they refrain from using such violent phrases before the half-demon woman shoved her underlings aside to take over the battle herself. In response to her arrival, a sudden, powerful torrent of liquid surged across the cobblestones, catching several of the surrounding men in its spray. He opened his eyes wide in surprise as the sudden surge disrupted the entire battlefield. Without hesitation, he launched himself high into the air as a pair of colossal dark claws slammed into the ground right beneath him. He executed a clean backward flip, narrowly evading the massive shadowed limbs that tore through the air where he had stood just a second prior. After the heavy impact shattered the stone behind him, he landed on one knee, using his spear to balance himself amidst the swirling dust. The half-demon woman taunted him, noting that his movements had begun to slow down and mockingly asking what happened to his earlier energy. Remaining completely unfazed by her taunts, he deliberately controlled his breathing and energy output to preserve his stamina for the long fight ahead. He calculated that even if the demonic leader fell, maintaining possession of his spear, a weapon capable of destroying entire kingdoms, was essential to surviving the trials to come. Before he could formulate his next move, a massive shadowy arm burst forth unexpectedly from the debris right behind him. Caught entirely off guard by the ambush, he gasped in shock as the monstrous hand loomed over his shoulder. He narrowly avoided a spray of acidic fluid, grimacing as it dissolved the ground nearby. With a swift strike, he fended off another assault, pushing his body to retreat into open ground. The half-demon boss declared it was time to end the battle, her menacing presence looming over the clearing. Realizing his physical limits were rapidly approaching, he took comfort in knowing he had bought enough precious time for his companions to escape. Attempting to spring backward to maintain distance, his foot slipped on the uneven terrain, sending him tumbling headfirst onto the harsh earth. Seeing him fallen and vulnerable, the monstrous commander cackled in triumph, convinced victory was hers. However, Atai suddenly emerged near the tree line, taking steady aim with her rifle at the distracted creature. Locking her sight onto the target, she focused her magical energy and prepared to squeeze the trigger. A thunderous blast echoed through the forest as the high-velocity projectile streaked across the battlefield, striking the monster with devastating force. Reeling from the violent impact, The creature howled in agony as dark energy burst from her body, momentarily halting her deadly rampage. Hovering over the young swordsman with terrifying pitch-black eyes, the spider-like monstrosity prepared to end his life in a single swift blow. Before the creature could strike, a blinding bolt of lightning descended from above, violently crushing the beast into the earth. Distraught by the sudden defeat of their monstrous leader, the remaining bandits panicked and fled into the darkness, leaving the young swordsman behind in disbelief. He slowly picked himself up in the quiet, ruined hall, gripping his spear while processing the sudden turn of events. Turning toward the rainy exit, he gasped in surprise as a familiar figure emerged through the downpour, holding a long rifle. Without hesitation, she rushed into his arms, wrapping herself around him in relief. She confessed that seeing him in danger forced her to infuse lightning into a specialized bullet, ensuring the powerful strike took down the creature without endangering him. Looking back at the smoldering devastation behind them, he was utterly awestruck by the sheer magnitude of the magical firepower she possessed. Wondering how she managed to find him in the middle of the chaotic battle, he listened as she explained her secret. She revealed that she had secretly placed a tracking mark on him beforehand. Although the temporary enchantment lasted only a week unless renewed, it allowed her to locate him anywhere, and she was simply grateful that he was safe. Embracing closely beneath the heavy downpour, they shared a tranquil moment amidst the dark, rain-soaked foliage. Feeling a wave of remorse for putting her through such anxiety, he sincerely apologized for worrying her. In response, she urged him to promise that whenever danger lay ahead, he would always allow her to stand by his side. With a soft smile, he gave her his word and expressed his gratitude as rain continued to fall heavily around them in the dark woods. He made his way back through the heavy downpour alongside his dark elf companion, catching the eye of Cecil, who gasped in surprise as she spotted them returning to the water's edge where the rowboats were moored. Irritated by their delay, she immediately demanded to know why they had taken so long and pressed him about the unfamiliar girl at his side, though he firmly asked her to hold her questions for the moment. Realizing there was no time to argue, she reluctantly relented, emphasizing that they couldn't afford to waste any more time while looking anxiously out at the murky water. The relentless rain pounded against the river, raising serious concerns that setting sail without visibility or direction would leave them lost in the storm. Fearing that their small craft would capsize in such harsh conditions, he cursed under his breath as he stared up at the dark, overcast sky. To their immense relief, the storm suddenly broke, allowing bright beams of sunlight to pierce through the clouds and illuminate the calm waters ahead, prompting them to seize the opportunity and set out at once. Wood sliced cleanly through the ocean waves as their wooden vessel pushed out into open water. Glancing over from his rowboat toward the second vessel, he suddenly called out in alarm upon noticing that something was terribly wrong with the young boy sitting slumped beside her. Examining the unconscious boy, she noted that his skin was dangerously cold to the touch, while he observed dark, strange spots mottling the young thief's body and quickly deduced it was the lingering effect of the demon woman's venom. While she frantically tried to rouse the boy, he produced a rare, costly medicine from his belongings, offering it in hopes that its versatile curative properties would neutralize the deadly toxin before it was too late. He watched as Cecil raised her voice in protest, arguing that the precious medicine could have been saved for her own needs, but he remained firm in his decision, knowing the dying boy required immediate help. Reluctantly accepting his reasoning, she knelt beside the boy and gently coaxed him to swallow the cure. Pressing the vial to his cold lips, she pleaded with him to drink every last drop. Instead of swallowing, his throat convulsed violently, coughing the elixir right back out. The boy slumped back onto the floor, motionless as the wasted potion spilled down his pale chin. She stared in sheer disbelief, her fingers trembling as she squeezed the empty bottle and demanded to know why the miracle cure had failed. Slowly, the lingering spark of life dissolved from his eyes, leaving his expression hollow and still. Realization crashed over the companions, locking them in a stunned, suffocating silence. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she softly announced that death had already claimed him, leaving the group wrapped in heavy grief. Having returned after their ordeal at sea, the party's first duty was to afford Matsuda a proper burial. As they stood together, Makoto could not stop thinking about the young man's mother back home, knowing full well how deeply she cherished her son and how desperately she longed to hold him in her arms once more. Lying restless in his bed, he found himself utterly incapable of confronting her with the cold truth. The thought of personally bringing Matsuda's lifeless body to his mother, or forcing the words of his death past his throat, filled him with agonizing dread. Because of this heavy burden, he resolved that they would report Matsuda as simply missing, leaving his ultimate fate unknown to the world. Walking along the shore alongside Cecil and Atai, he clung to this quiet deception as the only mercy he could offer. He recalled how one of his companions had made her own peace with the tragedy, reflecting on how she had acted entirely for her own reasons to attempt a rescue, harboring no regrets because trying to save him was far better than remaining idle. Observing Cecil walking tall and steadfast after taking time to compose her heart, he recognized the quiet strength in her posture. He realized that those who live by the sword possess an innate ability to process grief, holding a deep understanding of the delicate boundary between life and death. Glancing back at the two women, he sensed that Atai shared that same hardened resolve, forged through her relentless struggle for survival in the labyrinth before her days of servitude. As they walked together along the beach, a bitter realization weighed on him. Among their group, he was the only one who had lived a normal, sheltered life, leaving him entirely unprepared to cope with such sudden tragedy. His eyes cast downward, clouded with silent anguish and remorse that he could not shake off. Noticing his lingering despair, Cecil turned back toward him with a firm, steady gaze, reminding him that no matter how much he tormented himself, their past actions could not be undone, and as long as Lord Harold remained a threat, they had to keep moving forward. She turned toward him, her soft eyes searching his troubled expression as she realized the depth of his unspoken burden. Before he could respond, a distraught woman burst into the street, grabbing his shoulders in a panic as she begged for news of her missing son, Matsuda. Amidst the quiet town square, the desperate mother revealed through her tears that her husband had just passed away, leaving her entirely alone in her grief. She wept openly, recounting how her late husband had longed only to feel his son's head beneath his hand one last time before dying, a revelation that froze the young warrior in sheer horror. Her heartbreaking tale continued, describing how Matsuda had set out so fervently to find a cure for his father, unaware that neither would ever return to the other. Crushed by the devastating weight of her words, he agonized over whether he could have altered their fates, realizing with bitter sorrow that the boy's desperate quest had ended in tragedy for both father and son. Tormented by unbearable remorse, he clutched at his chest, convinced that better choices on his part might have spared both lives from destruction. Though the elf companion watched him silently, attempting to rationalize that the venom had already sealed the boy's fate regardless of their actions, he could not find solace in such logic. His gaze turned hollow as moral certainty slipped away completely, leaving him trapped in a cloud of confusion and guilt. Bowing low with quiet gratitude, the grieving mother apologized for burdening them with her sorrow before turning to walk away into the quiet streets, leaving them alone in the heavy silence. He stood silently as the heartbroken mother declared her unwavering determination to search for her missing son, calling him the only thing she had left in the world. Watching her figure vanish down the cobblestone street into the distant light, the young warrior and his dark elf companion could only look on in solemn silence, heavy with unexpressed truth. Overwhelmed by an agonizing wave of guilt, his face contorted in quiet anguish, prompting Cecil to draw close and gaze at him with profound empathy and concern. Down at the harbor, ships lay quietly docked along the pier as life in the port city continued its steady, indifferent rhythm. Several days drifted past in quiet monotony, with him spending long hours sitting alone on the edge of his bed, trapped in his thoughts while nothing out of the ordinary occurred. His only notable interaction during those dull days was speaking with Atai, sharing the news of the small rock snake they had found, and deciding on a fitting name together. As night settled over the room, he realized this would be their final evening in town before their scheduled departure. Staring into his reflection in the mirror, he contemplated how the tragedy of Matsuda was already fading into history as time inexorably marched forward. Somewhere beyond the town, a makeshift grave marked with a single flower rested in silence, A reminder that while others might rationalize such sudden endings as ordinary, he could not easily dismiss it. Beneath his calm exterior, a tempest of unresolved turmoil and dark frustration began to churn within his soul. He lay suspended in dark anxiety, tormented by terrifying visions of his own demise, wondering when his sudden end would finally arrive and what fate awaited him when it did. Clenching his chest, he replayed past close calls, the burning house, the brutal clash in the hideout, and Natai's razor-thin rescue. Realizing how narrowly he had escaped death, just as a door quietly opened to reveal Natii standing in the entryway. Spotting a troubled look on the maid's face, the young man paused to ask if something was wrong or if she was suffering from pain, but she hurriedly insisted that nothing was amiss. Beneath her quiet denial, her wide, trembling eyes betray a deep, unspoken turmoil that she desperately tries to conceal. Unable to contain her surging emotions any longer, she suddenly leans forward, cradling his face in her hands and pressing her lips to his in a desperate, passionate kiss that leaves him frozen in astonishment. Their lips remain locked together as the unexpected warmth of her embrace lingers, shattering his composure. The tender contact deepens, drawing both of them into a quiet space where words yield to raw feeling. As she slowly parts her lips and pulls back slightly, he softly speaks her name, meeting her misty, longing gaze with her hand still lingering gently against his neck. Observing the anguish and longing flushed across her face, he reflects on whether offering comfort to a woman carrying such unspoken pain through love is the right path to take. He held her close, deep in a passionate embrace, their lips locking together repeatedly in an intense exchange of affection. Ultimately, their shared ecstasy reached its peak, releasing an explosion of liquid emotion across the floorboards. High at sea, the ship glides steadily through the dark, rolling waves under a dimly lit night sky. Inside one of the vessel's quiet cabins, the young adventurer sits on the edge of the bed, clutching his head in anguish while the sleeping dark elf lies quietly beside him. He buries his face in his hands, completely overwhelmed by sudden anxiety and regret over what has just taken place. Trying to ground his spiraling thoughts in objective facts, he recalls that Natii had explicitly urged him to do as he pleased, offering him a semblance of justification. Without that explicit permission to lean on as a shield, he fears his actions could easily be viewed as a horrible violation. The dark reality of the collar of servitude looms heavily, knowing that if she had offered resistance, the magical artifact might have interpreted it as hostility and taken her life. Gazing down at her peaceful sleeping form, he comes to terms with his true feelings, acknowledging that his desire for her ran far deeper than mere physical temptation. Unable to calm his churning emotions, he quietly gets up from the bed, intent on stepping out into the cool night air to clear his head. Gliding smoothly across the open waters, a grand wooden vessel sails under a clear sky. On board, in a quiet deck area, Makoto sits alone at a long wooden bench, releasing a heavy sigh. He had walked around the ship in an effort to cool his racing thoughts, yet the vivid memories of his intimate moments with Cecil stubbornly lingered in his mind. Interrupting his contemplation, a cheerful voice calls out across the deck, greeting the young adventurer. Looking up, he recognizes Cecil's grandfather, Varen, who waves enthusiastically as he steps closer. Without hesitation, the older warrior sits down right beside him on the bench, catching Makoto slightly off guard by the close proximity. He wonders internally why Varen chose to sit so near, prompting the veteran to chuckle and explain that he simply wished to have a light-hearted chat. After a quiet moment, the older elf gazes forward and mentions that he came over to extend a sincere thank you, surprising the young man. He goes on to express both an apology and deep gratitude for how well Makoto looked after Cecil recently. He continued to observe as the boy suddenly gasped, a sudden memory of Matsuda's case flashing through his mind. Surprised that Cecil had shared such details with her grandfather, the young adventurer admitted that he was at a loss as to why he was being thanked at all. The older man smiled warmly, insisting on his gratitude by reminding him that Cecil was, after all, his beloved granddaughter. Modestly raising his hands, the boy tried to wave off the praise, insisting that Cecil was stronger than him and likely would have managed just fine on her own. His expression turning serious, The veteran warrior explained that strength and weakness, winning and losing, or even sheer survival were completely different matters altogether. As he fell silent, the boy reflected back on his father's tragic obsession with the dungeon's deeper floors, a path driven by misplaced ambition that ultimately left him all alone. Breaking the silence, the old knight warned him to remain cautious, noting that Cecil possessed a reckless streak that could easily cost someone their life if left unchecked. Winking with a subtle grin, he added that he knew right away who had been keeping her reckless nature in check, especially after Cecil grumbled about his strict supervision. Leaning in closer, the older man hazarded a guess, asking if Cecil had perhaps attempted a surprise attack on him, prompting an instant gasp of realization from the youth. Rubbing his forehead with a heavy sigh, the grandfather apologized profusely for his granddaughter's childish antics, leaving them both sitting quietly together on the bench. He expressed his relief upon hearing the young man's understanding response, looking out towards the open horizon. Shifting the subject, the veteran warrior assured him that no debt was owed, but asked if he would be willing to listen to a brief proposal. He admitted that his mind was indeed troubled and that he desperately needed a way to clear his head, prompting the older man to note that he had noticed the heavy burden weighing on the boy's face from the start. A crowd quickly gathered around the courtyard, drawn by the excitement of an impending bout between a wooden sword and a wooden spear. Standing in the center of the ring with a wooden spear in hand, the young adventurer was completely bewildered as to how he had been talked into a sparring match so quickly. His opponent raised a wooden training sword with a wide smile, advising that physical combat was the absolute best remedy for an overthinking mind since it forced blood away from the head. Watching the experienced swordsman take his stance, the boy realized with a sudden pang of familiarity that Cecil shared this exact same impulsive, battle-driven lineage. They were cut from the exact same cloth, a family driven entirely by instinct and brawn rather than careful deliberation. The veteran urged him to drop all hesitation and strike with full force, though the young man felt a deep sense of unease seeing the fiery intensity in the older man's eyes despite his age. Before he could even prepare his guard, the seasoned master unleashed a blindingly fast strike, the sheer speed and power of the wooden blade slicing through the air with a deafening roar. Varen Myers formally declared his identity, proudly revealing his former title as a sword sage. Hearing this, the young adventurer pondered the weight of such a title, deeply conscious of his own lack of formal training in the martial arts. He recalled Cecil's extraordinary prowess, recognizing that her skill was proof of the rigorous instruction she must have received from her grandfather. Interrupting his thoughts, the veteran warrior called out to ask if he was ready to begin. Seeing his hesitation, the master casually lowered his stance and encouraged him to treat the bout as a supportive lesson rather than a battle. Holding his wooden spear ready, the youth admitted his fear that attacking recklessly would only leave him open to an immediate counterstrike. The old master playfully warned that running away was not an option, causing the youth to grit his teeth in frustration at the overwhelming difference in their capabilities. Before he could react, the veteran launched forward with astounding speed, vanishing from sight in an instant and leaving the onlookers stunned. Reappearing right beside him, the master commended his instincts to block, even though the youth confessed he hadn't seen the movement coming at all. With a sharp crack, their wooden weapons collided as the intense sparring match erupted. He reeled in disbelief, watching the old master stroke his mustache thoughtfully. It hit the young swordsman with daunting clarity that Varen was casually holding back, exhibiting a terrifying level of composure despite the intensity of their duel. Before he could adjust his posture, the old master lunged forward with blinding speed, his wooden weapon striking hard against his own defense. Suddenly surrounded by a flurry of relentless afterimages, the young warrior desperately parried strikes from every angle, his lungs burning as he wondered how much longer he could endure the storm. Meanwhile, spectators gathered along the balcony in awe, marveling at the astonishing prowess and speed displayed by the veteran elder. The relentless barrage proved too much, ending the sparring match as the exhausted youth collapsed flat onto the wooden deck. Chest heaving as he stared up at the drifting clouds, he realized the bout had only lasted a few fleeting minutes, though Varen kindly asked if the intense workout had helped clear his head. Accepting Varen's outstretched hand to pull himself back to his feet, He quietly conceded that the physical beatdown had indeed washed away his lingering anxiety. Gazing out toward the open expanse of the sky, a quiet resolve settled within him to offer a sincere apology to Atai. Lowering his head, he reflected on the realization that confronting his shortcomings and asking for forgiveness was the only true way forward. Turning back to the master, he voiced his heartfelt gratitude and confidence, while Varen warmly reminded him that feeling troubled and lost at times is simply a natural part of being human. He sat beside the old warrior overlooking the quiet courtyard, confessing the doubts that had been weighing on his mind, only for Varen to gently admit that he had experienced similar burdens. The veteran explained that even during his time as the legendary sword sage, his life had been filled with constant turmoil, emphasizing that experiencing doubt and worry was a necessary part of existence. Surprised by this confession, the young adventurer questioned how someone of such immense strength could still hesitate. But Varen countered that those who claim to cut off all worry are merely running away from their responsibilities. Continuing his thought, the old master admitted that even now he was not immune to hesitation, citing the moment he chose to run away as proof. The boy stared in disbelief, unable to fathom that the legendary sword sage had actually fled from conflict. Looking off into the distance, the Grand Master quietly revealed that he chose to flee across the sea for one reason alone: to protect his precious granddaughter from the horrors of the oncoming war. Leaning against the balcony railing high above, the former sword sage shared that information continued to reach him through his personal network. He explained that, according to his careful investigations, the Empire was currently in a state of complete turmoil. Dark reports indicated that horrific secret arts were being utilized, fusing humans with the vicious demons of the labyrinth to forge an augmented army for upcoming war. Upon hearing this, the young adventurer was struck with a sudden, unsettling realization about the strange entity they had previously encountered. The veteran warrior noted that Cecil had already informed him about the humanoid demon they had fought, confirming it almost certainly originated from the Empire. He elaborated that while rare, some humanoid monsters escaped the labyrinth and turned to banditry when left to roam the outside world. Continuing his assessment, the master observed that while such creatures are inherently ferocious, the fact that Makoto and Cecil managed to fight one off meant it would be considered minor trouble in the grand scheme of things. Considering the growing unrest across the northeastern continent, the young man quietly concluded it was a relief they had departed the region when they did. He listened intently as the elder confessed the heavy burden of abandoning his homeland and companions to protect Cecil from an uncertain war. Though the old man still pondered whether he had truly chosen the right path, his calm resolve left a profound impression, standing in stark contrast to sadness. Reflecting on his own self-loathing and constant struggle to stay composed, the youth realized how much he had to learn from such emotional strength. Gazing out across the vast ocean together, the shared quiet moment eased the weight on his mind, offering a subtle sense of comfort. As the vessel glided smoothly across the sea accompanied by the cries of gulls, he stepped away to explore the lower decks. Navigating the gently swaying corridors of the ship, he paced outside the shop in trance, steadying his footing before stepping inside. Inside, a small, intricate ring caught his attention, its surface reflecting a surprisingly luminous glint that sparked his curiosity. Spotting a jar on the shelf containing silver clay from the labyrinth, he pondered its potential usefulness for crafting. He spoke with the shopkeeper, explaining his desire to create a handmade gift for Atai rather than purchasing an expensive item. Moved by his earnest request, the artisan kindly offered the use of his workshop tools in the back. When he stepped into the room just in time to see Cecil holding out a spoon with a gentle, coaxing gesture. She was carefully feeding her small stone companion, Echidna, before turning toward him with a bright, welcoming smile. Rubbing his cheek sheepishly, the young adventurer inquired about what she had been up to, receiving a calm explanation that she was simply feeding Echidna. Standing together in the quiet room, a brief silence settled between them as he prepared to address what had been weighing on his mind. Hesitating for a moment, he stammered out a sudden request to apologize for what took place the previous night, catching her completely off guard. She tilted her head in utter confusion, wondering aloud what on earth he could possibly feel the need to apologize for. He confessed that he worried he had forced his feelings onto her, and as he spoke, he gently slipped a finely crafted ring onto her finger, leaving her marveling at its beauty and asking if he had purchased it. Reaching out with a warm gesture, he proudly revealed that he hadn't bought it at all, but had forged the silver ring himself. A deep blush spread across her cheeks as she stared at her hand, overwhelmed by the realization that he had personally crafted such a meaningful gift for her. He lightheartedly explained how silver works as a ward against evil and monsters, while she stood beside him utterly spellbound by his thoughtful gesture. He stood attentively as she offered a playful chuckle, remarking that she understood his intent and teasingly warning him not to let any other wolf claim her. Caught entirely off guard by her words, he blinked in confusion, letting out a bewildered murmur. Seeing his reaction, she maintained her fond, teasing expression, pointing out that he seemed to have completely misunderstood her true feelings about the previous night. She went on to explain how deeply memorable their first night together had been, gently reassuring him that his soft, considerate touch was far better than any roughness, leaving no doubt about her happiness. The overwhelming revelation left him completely frozen in shock, his wide eyes fixed on her while she giggled at his sheer disbelief. The morning sun bathed the quiet town streets in a gentle light as the daily routine resumed along the rows of wooden buildings. Amidst their walk, Cecil gently touched her neck collar with a soft blush, explaining that it stood as proof that she belonged to Harold, and she had no desire to ever remove it. He stared back in mild disbelief, admitting he had fully expected her to want to be rid of it, though her tender confession left him utterly caught off guard. Sighing softly as they strolled through the bustling thoroughfare, the young man found himself touched, yet deeply flustered by her unwavering devotion. Their path soon brought them toward the harbor, where a magnificent wooden ship rose grandly beside the waterfront docks. Examining its towering masts and polished design, he recognized it as a luxury cruise ship, remembering having seen a similar vessel docked in a port town before. However, the grand view was suddenly juxtaposed by a grim sight nearby. A heavily chained woman wearing a collar was being led along the pier by an armored guard. Catching sight of the bound figure out of the corner of his eye, he turned his head in surprise, his attention instantly locked onto her. He quietly brushed off his companion's concern, murmuring a quick denial despite the uneasy feeling lingering in his chest as she asked if something was amiss. Glancing back into the bustling crowd along the street, he wondered if his eyes had simply played tricks on him amidst the sea of unfamiliar faces. By the following day, the lingering doubts had settled as he stood inside their room, lightly tossing a small segmented toy across the floor to pass the time. The little toy creature skittered swiftly across the wooden planks with a soft, rhythmic scraping sound. It came to a smooth stop directly at his feet, tilting its head up as if waiting for his next move. Noticing her eyes light up with sudden interest, he offered her the teaser wand so she could try, and she eagerly crouched down to play with the little creature. She spent the next few moments entirely absorbed in playing with it, her initial composure replaced by genuine delight while he watched over her. Their quiet atmosphere was broken by a faint rustling sound at the door, catching his attention as a folded letter slipped through the bottom gap. Picking up the paper, he read the contents while she leaned close over his shoulder. It was an invitation announcing a night market taking place in the town. He noted that his earlier walk hadn't revealed many exciting sights, but he turned to her with a smile and asked if she wanted to go check it out together. He offered to escort her to the night market, and she accepted with a gentle smile, agreeing to go as long as it was no trouble for him. Stepping out into the cool night air, they made their way toward the town's lively center beneath the darkened sky. The streets were overflowing with bustling crowds and illuminated by festive banners hung between the buildings. As they navigated through the throng, he wondered aloud whether the promotional flyers delivered earlier were responsible for drawing such an immense turnout. As they strolled further down the avenue, bright neon signage lit up the night, advertising an array of glowing gambling parlors packed with patrons playing cards and slot machines. Observing the lively establishments, he mused that a bustling port island naturally served as an ideal staging ground for such gambling dens. Suddenly, a loud, astonished shout echoed from inside one of the parlors, drawing their attention. Looking through the entryway, they witnessed a high-stakes card game in full swing, where a sharp-eyed patron was fiercely defending her winning streak against accusing opponents. Recognizing the unmistakable voice from within, he turned to his companion in surprise, while she nervously voiced her hope that her grandfather would never find out about his beloved granddaughter's secret activities. Recalling her grandfather Varen, he reflected on the old warrior's stern yet dignified demeanor, wondering how the man would react if he ever discovered that his treasured granddaughter was secretly a gambling fanatic. Torn by a sense of loyalty, he pondered whether he ought to inform Varen, feeling deeply indebted for the valuable martial advice the old man had shared with him. Ultimately deciding it was best not to pry into family matters, he suggested they simply pretend never to have heard a thing, to which she quietly agreed with relief. He suggested they get back on track and continue exploring the bustling night market, to which she cheerfully agreed. As they navigated through the crowds, they witnessed the grimmer realities of the port town, where captives bound in heavy iron chains were harshly ordered forward by unforgiving handlers. The night eventually gave way to a bright, clear morning sky over the coastal town. Down by the docks, he proudly showed off his rock-like companion, Echidna, who slithered about animatedly while Atai looked on in delighted wonder. Suddenly, the small creature perched on his shoulder began to pulse and quiver unexpectedly, catching him completely off guard. Observing the companion closely, he pointed out that Echidna's body seemed to be expanding larger by the day without shedding any skin, leaving him wondering how long this abnormal growth had been occurring. A sudden disturbing realization washed over him as he recalled finding Echidna's egg in the lair of a sinister half-human, half-demon entity, forcing him to question whether the creature was actually a snake at all. A sudden, terrified shriek shatters the peace inside the house, startling both Harold and Cecil as they turn toward the source of the commotion. There, the stern old master emerges, dragging a lively young girl who desperately begs for mercy from her own grandfather. Clutching her head, she groans in frustration while the old man scolds her for her reckless gambling habits. Despite her complaints, both Harold and Cecil can only look on, entirely unfazed by her defeat. She continues to sulk, insisting that her sharp eyes should have allowed her to read every dice roll and card turn. She simply cannot comprehend how a single match went so disastrously wrong for her. Enraged by her confession, her grandfather firmly grips her head in punishment, lecturing her for using her hard-earned martial vision for cheap tricks. Overwhelmed by his painful grip, she cries out frantically, reaching toward Harold for rescue. Unmoved by her frantic pleas, the young adventurer simply stands with open hands, making no effort whatsoever to intervene. Alongside him, Cecil watches the chaotic scene unfold with quiet astonishment. As the corporal punishment continues relentlessly in the background, he remains completely silent and detached. Frustrated by his utter lack of sympathy, she yells at him for standing by doing nothing. Watching the girl writhe in defeat, Cecil admits to feeling a bit sorry for her, though Harold pragmatically replies that anyone who willingly engages in reckless gambling ought to expect such consequences. Shifting the subject away from the ongoing commotion, he suddenly brings up something that has been lingering on his mind, pointing out how Cecil had addressed him directly by name earlier. Flustered by his sudden question, she turns her head away awkwardly, attempting to dismiss her slip of the tongue as nothing of importance while he stares back in confusion. She flushed crimson, caught entirely off guard by his blunt question, while he looked on in silent confusion. Turning his attention to Atai, he innocently praised her sweetness, prompting a gentle poke that made the young maid squirm in protest. Dumbfounded by his casual dismissal of the tense moment, the dark elf stammered in complete disbelief. Blushing deeply, she remained frozen under the weight of her flustered emotions, unable to articulate a single coherent thought. Later that day, the companions gathered inside a crowded local tavern, seeking a warm meal amidst the chatter of townspeople. Overhearing nearby conversations, the patrons were actively discussing a sudden fire that had broken out in the settlement earlier that morning. One of the villagers explained that a house was entirely consumed by flames, with the blaze spreading enough to damage neighboring structures, catching the young adventurer's full attention. As the locals sympathized with the victim's loss, he mentally pictured the devastating sight of a survivor kneeling in despair beside charred ruins. While Cecil voiced how frightening such an incident was, he quietly speculated whether the blaze was an accident or a deliberate act of arson. With a grim and resolute expression, he concluded that the island was proving far too troublesome, firm in his decision that they would depart the next morning. He inquired whether they could set sail for the western continent once they departed the island, considering their next destination as they walked through the quiet streets. Turning to him, she agreed that it was possible, though they would likely need to stop at a relay point along the way. Their conversation was abruptly cut short when a familiar girl spotted them in the alleyway, gasping in surprise as he glanced over his shoulder. Her face flushed with sudden anger, her sharp glare locking onto them with intense disapproval. She pointed a finger accusingly at him, shouting that he was a cold-blooded monster and that she had never expected him to be such a heartless person, leaving him completely flabbergasted. Shaking her fist in anger, she called him a traitor and stormed off into the town, leaving him staring after her in sheer bewilderment. As the sun began to set, he observed that she was heading straight back into town, ultimately deciding that they should avoid meddling in local troubles this time around. Cecil looked over at him with a soft smile, gently teasing that he was simply far too kind, wondering if his concern was triggered because it involved someone close. She continued teasingly, describing the girl as small, delicate, and naturally evoking a desire to protect her, which caused him to stammer in red-faced confusion. Flustered by her unexpected teasing, he stared at her and wondered aloud what had suddenly gotten into her. He noticed her quiet withdrawal as she murmured for him not to mind her, dismissing her brief outburst. Pondering the situation, he wondered if Atai was merely in a foul mood or if something more troubling was weighing on her mind. Their quiet contemplation was interrupted as attention shifted toward a large wooden ship docked nearby. Noticing movement aboard the vessel, she looked up toward the deck in curious surprise. Seeking to clear the heavy air, he gestured warm-heartedly and suggested they go take a look at the view together. When he added that he wanted to share the sight specifically with her, a gentle smile graced her face as she gladly concurred. Before they could move, her small creature companion abruptly popped out from her outfit, eliciting a soft chuckle from him as he remarked that it wanted to see the view too. Moments later, the gentle creaking of timber and splashing of water marked their arrival along the ship's outer deck. Standing side by side at the railing, they gazed out over the water toward the warmly lit buildings lining the waterfront. Looking out across the serene harbor, he quietly reflected that an ordinary city view derives its true beauty not from the scenery itself, but from whom one shares it with. He noticed the soft, radiant smile blossoming across her face, finding a quiet warmth in seeing her look so at ease. Gazing toward the night horizon, his thoughts settled on the simple comfort of her joy, confirming that she was truly content in this moment. Under the quiet night sky, the young adventurer and his dark elf companion stand side by side along the wooden railing, gazing out over the town bathed in the soft glow of evening lights. Breaking the tranquil stillness, he gently remarks that it is about time for them to head back, to which she softly agrees. He turns away from the view to lead the way, while she carefully adjusts her wide-brimmed hat as they prepare to depart. As they prepare to leave, their path is blocked by a tall figure leaning against a post further along the boardwalk, catching her attention. The sturdy elder turns to face them, revealing Varen, who greets them warmly and casually asks what brings them out together at such a late hour. With a broad grin that fails to conceal the fierce, piercing gleam in his eyes, he chuckles and explains that he is merely waiting for his foolish grandchild. Sensing a sudden chill beneath that cheerful demeanor, the young warrior notices the intense sharpness in the old master's glare, realizing his gaze lacks any genuine warmth. He watches quietly as the master smoothly shifts the conversation to ask about their plans upon returning, inwardly concluding that Varen must already be suspicious of Cecil. He watched in bewildered shock as the old master casually declared his drastic punishment, intending to tie up his own granddaughter and leave her suspended to reflect on her actions. Shocked by the severity of the sentence, the young adventurer questioned if taking Cecil's side to such an extreme was truly necessary, but the veteran warrior insisted he was remaining neutral. With an unyielding gaze, the older man made it clear that no further questions were required on the matter. Though he still felt the punishment was an extreme overreaction, his attention briefly shifted to the silent, intense stare directed at him from his companion's side. The old master sighed softly, remarking with a weary tone on how stubborn and reckless Cecil could be. Continuing his solemn reflection, he mused on how children rarely understand the burdened hearts of their elders, a sentiment that resonated quietly with those listening. His eyes narrowed with gravity as he confessed that while he normally doted on his grandchildren, current circumstances afforded him no room to turn a blind eye. He recalled with frustration how the girl had squandered her sharp, battle-trained perception not for honor, but to cheat in games of chance. Rubbing his face in profound disappointment, the Grandmaster lamented that her devious choices risked ruining her true potential and worth as a swordmaster. Suddenly breaking his heavy mood, the old master pointed directly toward the odd creature sitting comfortably beside them, leaving everyone startled by the sudden shift in curiosity. He stood silently beside his companion as she nonchalantly introduced the small lizard-like creature on her shoulder as their pet, prompting a dubious hum from the old swordmaster. The revelation hit immediately when the old man calmly questioned their decision to keep a demon as a pet, leaving both of them momentarily speechless. Dumbfounded by the word, the young adventurer tried to defend his ignorance by reflecting that he had simply found echidna interesting without ever considering its true species. When asked how he could identify such a beast, the elder recalled a past encounter in a labyrinth, adding that the dark elf had clearly been aware of the creature's nature all along. Turning toward his companion in total shock, he pressed her to confirm if the master's words were true, catching her completely off guard. Struggling for an answer, she silently admitted to herself that she had often wondered whether he actually knew what he was adopting when he took Echidna in. Realizing his complete blunder, the young man squeezed his eyes shut as an intense blush washed over his face, overwhelmed by sheer embarrassment. To ease the tension, the old man chuckled and noted how extraordinarily rare it was for anyone to tame a demon, while she agreed that such friendly behavior toward humans usually only existed in fairy tales. Still flustered, he quietly accepted their words as the master decided to shift the topic, casually expressing his wish for his granddaughter to return soon. However, the old man's expression suddenly darkened into a menacing grin as he reiterated his demand, making it clear that his granddaughter's reckoning was imminent. Sensing his stern intentions, the young adventurer cheerfully offered to help search for the runaway granddaughter, noting that misbehaving children certainly deserved discipline. The dark elf readily concurred with the plan. Meanwhile, her companion admitted that watching someone else squirm in sheer humiliation would finally give him some peace of mind after his own recent embarrassments. Together, they set out into the bustling, lantern-lit streets of the nightlife district to begin their search. Navigating through the crowded thoroughfare, he asked for her input on where they should look first. Stopping outside a brightly lit gambling establishment, the dark elf used her keen hearing to listen inside, reporting that she couldn't detect the girl's presence. Nodding, her companion suggested moving on to the next location. Suddenly, her pointed ears twitched as a distant sound caught her attention. She halted in front of another establishment adorned with playing card symbols, pointing toward the entrance as she confirmed catching the girl's voice inside. Expressing his sincere gratitude, the young man admitted how much harder the search would have been without Atai's cute abilities, prompting Cecil to generously offer him any favor he desired once they finished. Looking up with a deep blush and clutching her hands near her chest, she timidly asked if she could request that favor immediately, tonight. As her wide, blushing eyes searched his for confirmation, he froze in utter shock, stunned by her unexpected request. Walking down a crowded thoroughfare alongside Cecil, Makoto scratched his cheek in mild confusion, unable to understand what the commotion ahead was about. As they stepped through a wooden doorway, he froze in utter disbelief at the blinding, scorching light radiating from inside. Opening the doors completely revealed a raging inferno engulfing the wooden interior, prompting panicked shouts of fire from everyone inside. Amidst the chaos, terrified patrons rushed past them into the street, shouting in terror about a dangerous maniac who had set the establishment ablaze. The fleeing men screamed for everyone to run, bewildered as to why someone would start a fire simply because he had lost a duel to a girl. With dense white smoke billowing everywhere and obscuring their vision, Makoto struggled to keep track of his companions through the haze. Refusing to abandon the scene, The two dashed forward deeper into the burning structure, calling out in alarm. Makoto reached the central hall only to find Varen's granddaughter standing her ground with drawn sword, furiously berating opponents who had set the building ablaze over a lost bet. Facing her down among the fallen burning beams, armored figures casually brushed off her anger, callously insisting that they were merely having fun despite the surrounding destruction. She could only watch in disbelief as the defeated arsonists casually admitted that setting the building ablaze was merely their idea of fun. She watched as they began to retreat, just as Makoto and Cecil suddenly arrived through the dense smoke and flames. Hearing the fleeing criminals blame her for their own destructive actions, her brow furrowed in fury at their absurd logic. She lunged forward to pursue the criminals, but Makoto caught her wrist, holding her back from plunging deeper into the dangerous inferno. Startled by his grip, she turned back, demanding to know what he was doing, while he quickly assessed the rising danger of the raging fire. Before she could break free and give chase, sudden heat exhaustion overwhelmed her, causing her to collapse weakly into his arms. Seeing her faint, Cecil observed her with a calm expression, concluding that the oppressive heat had finally taken its toll. Studying the unconscious girl, she reassured Makoto that she was unharmed and suggested they carry her home before the situation escalated. Holding her gently, he cast a suspicious glance at Cecil to ask if she had done something, prompting a flustered denial from the elf. Looking around as the flames rapidly engulfed the wooden walls, she insisted they stop arguing and focus on escaping the burning building immediately. She helped carry the unconscious young woman safely back to Varen, who greeted them with overwhelming relief and asked what had happened to his granddaughter. He listened attentively as they explained, realizing that the chaotic noise out in the streets now made complete sense. She lay fast asleep on a nearby bench, completely exhausted after her reckless gambling spree preceding the fire. He decided to postpone scolding her until she woke up, though the young adventurer couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for her impending punishment. Stepping away into the quiet hallway, he turned to his companion, sensing that the adrenaline of the rescue was finally wearing off. She stole a lingering glance at him, her heart beating faster as she hesitated to voice what was on her mind. She sheepishly mentioned how filthy the smoke and ash had left her, suggesting they go freshen up together in the baths. She stepped into the warm bath, her cheeks flushing crimson as the soothing water enveloped them in privacy. She leaned in close and embraced him softly, whispering how wonderful he smelled and driving a wave of Out on the open ocean, a massive wooden vessel cut smoothly through the dark, restless waves under the quiet night sky. Deep within one of the dimly lit cabins, Harold slowly blinked open his heavy eyes, gradually rousing from sleep. Because he had just awoken, he quietly sat up in bed, careful not to disturb Cecil, who was resting peacefully right beside him. He reached out with a gentle touch to stroke her soft white hair as she slept. As he looked across the quiet room, his attention was caught by his stone monster companion standing near the doorway and watching him intently. The creature gestured toward the hallway, silently communicating its desire to show him something outside. He tilted his head in mild surprise, wondering what it could possibly want at this hour. Observing his dagger resting nearby, he reasoned that he had no particular cause to decline the invitation. With that thought in mind, he quietly prepared himself and followed the rocky companion out into the corridor, deciding a short walk in the cool night air wouldn't hurt. He ascended the wooden stairs leading up to the main deck, asking the creature if it simply wanted to admire the night view again or if something else had drawn its interest. He stepped out under the glowing full moon that hung high in the clear, dark night sky. Looking around under the pale lunar glow, he found himself standing beside the massive wooden hull of a grand ship rather than the luxury vessel he had expected. Suddenly startled by a bright flare behind him, he spun around in shock to find a violent fire roaring through a nearby structure. Staring in utter bewilderment at the rising flames, he struggled to comprehend how such a blaze could have erupted out of nowhere. As he observed the burning shack from a safe distance, he reasoned that the flames would quickly consume the structure and extinguish themselves without spreading to any nearby buildings. However, suspicion lingered in his mind, as he knew an uninhabited shack could not have spontaneously caught fire without a deliberate cause. His train of thought was abruptly shattered by the sharp metallic clatter of heavy footsteps, sparking a sudden dread that the culprit behind the blaze was nearby. Emerging from the shadows came a knight clad in full plate armor, accompanied by a captive dark elf woman bound in heavy chains. Facing the unfamiliar pair before the burning wreckage, he immediately demanded to know their identities. In response, the armored stranger merely chuckled in amusement, mockingly questioning his manners, to which he sharply countered that he was simply demanding the answers he deserved. He watched in stunned silence as the arrogant noble proudly introduced himself as the third son of an imperial count, casually dismissing him as mere trash. Hearing this, the young adventurer suddenly recalled where he had seen this man before, remembering him as the armored buyer from the auction house who had won the Dark Elf and was rumored to be entering the labyrinth. Basked in his own vanity, the noble asked if his lineage was not impressive, to which the boy could only offer a bewildered, breathless response. Pressing further, the youth asked how someone of such high standing ended up on a remote island, prompting the noble to offer an explanation. The knight revealed that he could never remain in one place, haunted since childhood by an incessant, mysterious voice that refused to leave his mind. Gazing upward dramatically, he explained that he treated this overwhelming urge as a divine revelation, compelling him to wander endlessly from town to town. Though his father supplied him with ample wealth to live in luxury, the sinister voice within him constantly whispered a single, dark command: to burn everything to the ground. Throwing his arms wide in pyromaniacal glee, the nobleman shouted that anything unamusing should be set ablaze, reveling in the pure, chaotic delight of watching flames consume all around him. As the fire raged behind them, the young adventurer pieced together the horrifying truth, realizing this pyromaniac was responsible for the inferno back in the kingdom of Lamist as well. Looking at the burning structure and remembering the gambling den from the night before, he understood that the knight was the arsonist behind both attacks, yet a deeper mystery still nagged at his mind. He stood frozen as the armored knight offhandedly asked if the distant fire back in the kingdom of Lamist had consumed a newly built house. With a sickeningly casual smile, the knight reminisced about the event, fondly recalling how pristine the structure had been and how irresistible it had made it to set ablaze. The horrifying truth hit him like a physical blow. This nonchalant man before him was the very arsonist who had destroyed his home. As his shock twisted into pure, trembling hatred, the knight merely tilted his head and asked why he was so curious. A fierce, vengeful cry against those who had destroyed his house echoed into the dark abyss. Sighing softly under the pale moonlight, the young adventurer brushed the dramatic declaration aside, deciding it was none of his concern. Glancing back toward the plume of smoke rising from the burning ruins, he reaffirmed his total indifference, admitting that he no longer cared about what happened to the estate. Turning his gaze toward the armored stranger standing before him, he noted the man's unhinged, twisted expression and resolved to distance himself as quickly as possible. Offering a polite wave as he prepared to make a swift exit, his escape was abruptly cut short when a cold steel blade flashed forward, coming to a halt directly against his throat. The sadistic mercenary sneered, mocking the youth for believing he could simply walk away after learning such dangerous secrets, while the terrified dark elf watched in horror behind him. Raising his hands in a desperate bid to calm the armed threat, he insisted he would keep his mouth shut, but his captor rested his blade casually on his shoulder with an incredulous smirk. The mercenary's grin widened into a sinister scowl as he stated that dead men tell no tales, revealing his plan to eliminate every single witness from the gambling den as well. Hearing the villain casually outline his horrific plans of torture and cruelty against the young woman, a dark, dangerous shadow fell across his face as his patience finally shattered. He stood resolute as the armored mercenary sneered, uttering a crude taunt to provoke him. Weighing his options, he realized retreat was out of the question. Even though Cecil possessed formidable power, leaving her to face this threat alone was not something he could allow. Observing how rapidly he adjusted his stance, the brute acknowledged his swift decision, while the young warrior mentally determined that his companion should remain safely out of the fray. Before he could fully settle his strategy, the mercenary suddenly lunged forward with a violent strike, mocking him for glancing away during battle. In response, he raised his weapon instantly, creating a shower of sparks as he deflected the heavy blade with masterful precision. Shocked that his powerful strike had been so effortlessly parried, the armored attacker grinned in disbelief, questioning how such a blow was turned aside, while his opponent silently gritted his teeth. Pressing the offensive, the mercenary mocked his adversary's strength, shouting that his defense was weak before launching into another furious succession of sword swings. As the brute shouted taunts and insisted he was growing weaker, the young swordsman secretly sighed in disappointment, realizing his opponent was merely an unrefined amateur rather than a dangerous threat. Knocking the heavy warrior off balance, he glanced toward the bound elf woman, suddenly understanding that she was the true cause of Cecil's high alert from the previous night. Yet as the fight neared its end, he froze in utter disbelief as the bound elf openly cheered with delight at her master's humiliating defeat. He wondered if the elf was simply relieved to see her tormentor suffer, remembering how cruelly the mercenary had mistreated her at the labyrinth entrance. Reeling from the initial exchange, his opponent caught his breath and readjusted his stance, shouting that he was finally going to take the fight seriously. With a furious roar, the armored brute charged forward, only to be flattened instantly by a swift, crushing blow to the head. Looking down at the unconscious warrior, the young adventurer reasoned that since the man would surely hold a deep grudge after this defeat, it might be safer to simply finish him off. Before he could act, she quickly intervened, warning him that he must not kill her captor until the magical collar binding her was removed or another way was found. She went on to express her gratitude for him thoroughly beating the man, admitting that she would have been in severe trouble if she had attempted to strike her master herself due to the collar's magic. Looking down at the unconscious figure, she bluntly added that the man was pitifully weak and that she had no idea how someone of his low caliber had managed to enter the labyrinth in the first place. She continued her harsh assessment, remarking that he would have perished long ago if she had not been protecting him, not to mention his foolish habit of lighting fires in dangerous territory. As she hurled one final crude insult at her fallen captor, the young warrior stood back in disbelief, silently noting just how foul-mouthed the elegant elf turned out to be. Rather than executing the helpless attacker, he retrieved sturdy rope and securely bound the unconscious man, prompting the elf to look on in curiosity and ask what he was doing. He continued securing the heavy ropes around the fallen mercenary beneath the boardwalk, remaining unfazed as the elf panicked over the dire political consequences and the lingering threat of her enslavement collar if an empire noble were captured. Furious at his nonchalance, she slapped a paper label marking the captive as an arsonist onto his head, demanding sympathy, but the young swordsman simply countered that a dangerous criminal could not be left unattended. Her frustration exploded into a torrent of shockingly foul-mouthed threats toward her bound captor, leaving him to sigh in disbelief before casually slinging his staff over his shoulder and walking away with his serpent companion, content that the affair was settled.